The Battle of Coruscant rages above the Republic's capital. Thousands of ships exchange fire in the upper atmosphere, the sky itself burning with the chaos of war. Inside the Invisible Hand, General Grievous's flagship, two Jedi ride an elevator upward toward the bridge. The plan is simple: rescue Chancellor Palpatine and escape before the ship breaks apart around them. Obi-Wan Kenobi stands beside his former apprentice, composed as always, his blue eyes reading the situation with the calm precision of a Soresu master. He turns to Anakin and says, "Spring the trap?" Anakin Skywalker's body freezes mid-breath. Then Luke Skywalker floods in. It isn't gradual, it isn't gentle. One moment, there's the roaring continuity of a 60-year-old consciousness teaching younglings on Ossus, feeling the warm pulse of the living force through generations of students, reaching out across a new Jedi Order that he spent his entire life building from nothing. The next moment, there's an elevator, two flesh hands, a body that hums with raw force energy so enormous it feels like standing inside a star, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, young and whole and alive, looking at him with mild concern. Luke's internal world detonates. These hands, Force, I know these hands. I've seen them in 1,000 holocron recordings. I've seen what they become. Black gloves over mechanical fingers, instruments of fear and death. But right now, they're flesh. They're real. They're 22 years old, and they have never harmed anyone who didn't deserve it. And there is still time. I'm in my father's body. I'm in my father's body at the exact moment everything begins to go wrong. The elevator hums upward. Coruscant burns outside the viewport. Obi-Wan is still looking at him, waiting for an answer about springing the trap. And somewhere in this ship, sitting in a chair with his wrists bound, pretending to be a helpless prisoner, is Darth Sidious. The man who destroyed the Jedi Order, the man who turned Anakin Skywalker into Darth Vader, the man who stole Luke's mother, his father, his sister's childhood, and 20 years of galactic freedom. Luke breathes. The Force flows through this body like nothing he has ever felt. In his own timeline, at 60+ years old, he was the most powerful Force user alive. But that power came through a body worn by decades, scarred by Palpatine's lightning, limited by age and injury and the long grinding cost of living a Jedi's life. This body is Anakin Skywalker's body at 22, uninjured, unbroken, operating at the absolute peak of what a living being can channel through the Force. Over 20,000 midichlorians per cell, the highest count ever recorded. The chosen one, in his prime, with 60 years of wisdom behind his eyes. Luke exhales. He has approximately 15 seconds before Obi-Wan's concern becomes alarm. He does something that surprises him. He doesn't plan it. The emotion simply rises through all the careful Jedi composure he's spent a lifetime building, and it overwhelms him completely. He turns to Obi-Wan Kenobi and he pulls the man into an embrace. Obi-Wan goes rigid with surprise. This is not Anakin behavior. Anakin expresses affection with sarcasm, with competition, with the specific language of two people who have fought side by side for a decade. He doesn't stop mid-mission in an enemy flagship to hug his former master. But Luke needs 1 second, just 1 second of Obi-Wan Kenobi alive and young and real before he has to become someone else. Anakin, Obi-Wan says carefully, his arms coming up to return the embrace with the confused warmth of someone who genuinely loves the person doing something. Inexplicable, are you quite all right? Luke pulls back. He looks at Obi-Wan's face. 40-something, strong, tired around the eyes from years of war, but fundamentally undamaged. Alive in a way he will not be in the timeline Luke came from. Not dead, because Obi-Wan lived a long time in Luke's timeline, but something worse than dead. Hollowed out. 20 years of exile on Tatooine, watching the galaxy burn and knowing he bore some responsibility for it. I'm fine, Luke says. His voice sounds different to his own ears. Younger. Anakin's voice. He files the strangeness away. We're not springing any trap, Master. Obi-Wan blinks. I beg your pardon? The trap. We're not springing it. Luke watches the understanding move across Obi-Wan's face. He's remembering that they discussed this on the way in, that Anakin was characteristically eager to let the battle droids come and fight their way through. Luke continues before Obi-Wan can ask questions. I know the layout of the ship, I know where Palpatine is being held, and exactly how many droids stand between us and him. We move quietly, we move efficiently, we don't announce ourselves to every battle droid on the vessel. We get in, we get the Chancellor, we get out. Obi-Wan studies him. Something has shifted in Anakin's Force presence in the last 30 seconds. He can't identify it precisely. It feels like Anakin, but also doesn't feel like Anakin. Like a familiar song played in a different key. That is, Obi-Wan says slowly, The most tactically sensible thing you've said since we boarded this ship. Don't get used to it, Luke says, and he allows a small smile because Anakin would have said something like that, and because it's true, and because it hurts to be funny in his father's voice. The elevator doors open. Battle droids. Luke moves. What Obi-Wan sees in the next 40 seconds recalibrates everything he thinks he knows about his former Padawan. In 10 years of fighting alongside Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan has developed an extremely precise internal model of how Anakin fights. He leads with aggression. He closes distance immediately. He uses his extraordinary physical strength and force power to overwhelm opponents before they can organize a response. It's effective, it's impressive, and it's always recognizably Anakin. Raw power expressed as forward momentum. This is none of those things. Luke holds his ground for the first 2 seconds while 3 battle droids take aim. His blade ignites blue, he moves it in a pattern that intercepts all 3 incoming bolts simultaneously, redirecting each with minimum blade movement, conserving energy that Anakin would have spent on a dramatic deflection. Then he steps forward, not charging, stepping, measured and deliberate, and disables the first droid with a precise thrust to its central processor. His free hand extends and the second droid folds in on itself telekinetically, mechanisms crushed without a sound. The third droid attempts to retreat and call for reinforcements. Luke uses the Force to pull it backward into his blade path and it falls before the alert signal leaves its transmitter. 3 droids, 7 seconds, no wasted motion, no showmanship. Obi-Wan deals with his own cluster and then turns to look at his former apprentice, and his expression is the expression of a man trying to reconcile 2 completely different things. "You're fighting like me," he says. "I'm fighting like someone who's been doing this for 40 years, Luke says, which is the most honest thing he's said since waking up, and moves forward down the corridor. R2-D2 rolls behind them, his dome turning between Luke and the corridor ahead with a series of beeps that translate roughly as, "Something is very wrong with the tall one." They fight their way through the invisible hand with efficiency that leaves Obi-Wan increasingly unsettled. Luke knows this ship. He's studied the Battle of Coruscant from historical records, from Obi-Wan's own later accounts, from a dozen different sources across his lifetime. He knows where the droid patrols are heavy. He knows which corridors connect. He knows that Grievous has already begun preparing his escape route because Grievous always prioritizes self-preservation over tactical advantage. He knows something else, too. He knows what's waiting on the observation deck. Palpatine and Count Dooku. The duel with Dooku. Mercy is not weakness. The doors to the observation deck slide open. The space is circular, dominated by a massive viewport showing the battle raging outside. Chancellor Palpatine sits in an elevated chair, his wrists bound, staged, Luke knows, because Palpatine could break those restraints without using the Force at all, but the performance of helplessness is essential to his manipulation. Count Dooku stands to one side, curved lightsaber hilt clipped to his belt, his posture the effortless aristocratic ease of a man who has not been genuinely challenged in a duel in years. Luke takes all of this in the moment the doors open and his Force senses extend across the room and he feels it. Darth Sidious, right there, in that chair with the bound wrists and the grandfatherly concern already assembling itself across his features. Luke has spent his entire life knowing intellectually that Palpatine was a monster beneath the mask. Standing in the same room and feeling the dark side radiating from him, cold, ancient, patient, vast, is something different. It's the Force equivalent of looking directly into a black hole. Luke does not let any of this reach his face. "Anakin Skywalker," Palpatine says, and his voice carries that practiced warmth, that specific frequency of approval and encouragement he's spent years calibrating to Anakin's psychological vulnerabilities. "At last, I knew you would come. Neutral. Professional." Palpatine's eyes move across him with an assessment that is too fast and too precise for a man who claims to have no Force sensitivity. Something flickers in his expression. Luke holds himself still, projects the surface of Anakin's emotions, relief at finding the Chancellor alive, the residual adrenaline of combat, the eager edge of a young Jedi on a mission. He learned from his father's mistakes. He knows exactly what Palpatine is looking for. Count Dooku descends the steps from his elevated position with the unhurried grace of a man who considers haste beneath him. His white hair and precise beard are immaculate. His posture communicates centuries of noble breeding. He looks at Anakin with the focused attention of a duelist cataloging a known opponent. "Skywalker," he says, "I've been expecting you." "Count," Luke says, "I'd genuinely rather not do this." Dooku stops moving. This is not what he expected. In every previous encounter, Anakin Skywalker has come in hot, aggressive, angry, eager to prove something. The boy's emotional vulnerability was always his most useful feature from a tactical perspective. You could taunt him into overextension, you could use his attachment to Obi-Wan against him, you could watch him make mistakes in real time and simply wait for the opening. This Anakin is standing perfectly still with an expression that contains no anger at all. Rather not, Dooku says. You're a former Jedi Master, Luke says, a man of considerable intelligence who has, I suspect, spent the last several years wondering whether the path you chose was actually the one you believed in when you chose it. Killing you accomplishes nothing except removing a potential witness. I'd prefer to take you alive. Palpatine's expression tightens almost imperceptibly. Anakin, Count Dooku is a traitor to the Republic and a Sith Lord. There's no need for... With respect, Chancellor, Luke says, I'll handle this. Obi-Wan makes a small sound beside him that might be a suppressed laugh. Dooku ignites his lightsaber. The crimson blade casts red light across his features. Whatever philosophical detachment you're performing, boy, it won't survive contact with my blade. Luke ignites his blue blade and takes a guard stance that Dooku does not recognize. This is the first problem. Count Dooku has dueled Anakin Skywalker before. He has a precise internal model of Anakin's fighting style, the Gemso aggression, the emotional fuel, the tendency to come in high and hard and let power do the work that technique should do. His Makashi form was specifically designed to handle that kind of opponent. Makashi is the art of the blade against the blade, elegant and economical, built on the principle that the most refined response to aggression is precision. Luke is not being aggressive. He holds a guard that blends Soresu defensive positioning with the weight distribution of someone comfortable in Gemso. It's a hybrid that Dooku has never seen before because it requires mastery of multiple forms simultaneously. Not the superficial cross-training that most Jedi achieve, but the deep integration that only comes from decades of practice. The guard is patient. It is waiting. It contains no information about what Luke intends to do, because Luke intends to let Dooku commit first, and then exploit the commitment. Dooku attacks. His Makashi opening is a thing of genuine beauty, a flowing diagonal cut that transitions into a wrist rotation thrust, probing Luke's defense on two planes simultaneously. Against Anakin, this combination would produce a hard parry that Dooku could redirect into an overextension. Luke doesn't hard parry. He moves the minimum necessary distance, his blade intercepting Dooku's at an angle that bleeds the force of the strike sideways, and he's already moved before the thrust arrives, not backward but laterally, repositioning at Dooku's flank while Dooku's momentum carries him slightly forward. Dooku spins to meet him, his expression has changed. Interesting. They trade sequences. Dooku's Form 2 against Luke's hybrid, and the duel has a quality that Obi-Wan will spend years trying to describe afterward. Anakin fighting Dooku has always been a contest between aggression and elegance, power trying to overwhelm precision. This is something else. This is two masters who both understand patience, and the duel moves with the deliberate rhythm of a conversation between equals rather than the explosion of Anakin's previous encounters. Dooku tries Dun Mukh. I sense great conflict in you, Skywalker. You fight like someone trying to outrun their own nature. I fight like someone who's already made peace with their nature, Luke says, parrying a thrust. There's a difference. You hide something, Dooku presses, increasing the tempo. I've dueled Anakin Skywalker before. He burns like a sun. You're cold. Still, who are you actually fighting inside that body? Luke executes a Shatterpoint read, the technique he learned from Mace Windu's holocron, the ability to perceive the critical fault lines in an opponent's structure. He sees it, a slight over-rotation in Dooku's wrist that precedes his signature disarming bind. A habit developed over decades that Dooku himself is no longer consciously aware of. Every master has them. The body remembers what the mind has stopped monitoring. Luke waits for it. One more exchange. 2. There. He doesn't press the attack when the fault line appears. He doesn't need to. He uses a precise force-enhanced strike that contacts Dooku's blade at the exact angle to exploit the over-rotation, and both of Dooku's lightsabers spin away through the air simultaneously. Dooku's hands are intact. He's disarmed, not dismembered. Luke's blade comes to rest at his throat. Blue light on pale skin. Behind him, Palpatine's voice carries a specific edge that Luke recognizes as barely controlled fury wearing the costume of concern. Anakin, he's defeated. Kill him. He's too dangerous to... No. The word lands like a stone in water. Complete. Final. Palpatine pauses. Anakin, I understand the code's prohibition on. He's unarmed. He's defeated. He goes to trial. Luke doesn't look away from Dooku. He's going to stand before the Senate and tell them everything he knows. About the Separatists, about the war's origins, about who gave him his orders. Dooku's eyes are on Luke's face. His expression has moved through surprise and arrived somewhere that might be, impossibly, something like respect. You're not him, Dooku says quietly. Skywalker fights like a man trying to prove something. You fight like a man who already knows. I know enough, Luke says. Then, lower, for Dooku alone, I know you're expendable to your master. I know you've known it for years. I know that whatever you believed when you left the Jedi Order, whatever you thought you were building, he never intended to let you live to see it. Help us, testify, tell the truth. It's the only play you have left. Dooku is silent for a long moment. The invisible hand shudders around them, the battle outside intensifying, the ship sustaining damage. Time is running out. You speak with remarkable certainty for a Jedi Knight, Dooku says finally. I've had a lot of time to think about it, Luke says. He uses the Force to retrieve Dooku's lightsabers and clips them to his own belt. He binds Dooku's hands with cuffs from his utility belt. Across the room, Palpatine watches this with an expression that has shed most of its warmth and is now the expression of a man rapidly recalculating a situation that has departed from his expectations. Chancellor, Luke says, turning and moving to release Palpatine's staged restraints. We need to leave. Of course, Palpatine says. The warmth reassembles itself smoothly. Anakin, I have to say, your restraint today has been unexpected, in the best possible way. You've grown so much. Thank you, Luke says pleasantly, and thinks, I know exactly what you are. And you have no idea what's coming. The invisible hand breaks in half during their escape. They fall through the ship, lose the rear section, and crash land the front half on Coruscant's landing platform in a sequence that Obi-Wan will describe in his memoirs as the most terrifying 17 minutes of a career, with no shortage of terrifying minutes. Luke pilots with the effortless precision of someone who has flown everything from a T-65 X-Wing to a Star Destroyer in actual combat conditions. He lands what is essentially a burning piece of capital ship on a planetary surface, like he's parking a speeder. Obi-Wan climbs out of the wreckage and looks at the smoking hull around them. Then he looks at his former Padawan. Where did you learn to fly like that? I've always been a good pilot, Luke says, which is true in more ways than one. Meeting Mother, you're going to live. Coruscant at dusk. The capital city spreads in every direction, layer upon layer of civilization, the air thick with speeder traffic, and the distant sounds of a planet processing the news that the war's most dramatic engagement just ended above its skyline. Luke stands outside the door to Padme Amidala's apartment and cannot make himself press the control. R2-D2 beeps from beside him. The translation is something like, "You've been standing here for 4 minutes." I know, Luke says. That's not a normal amount of time to stand outside a door. I know. He presses the control. The door opens and Padme Amidala is standing there, 26 years old, radiant with relief, her pregnancy beginning to show beneath her robes, and Luke Skywalker, who has lived 60 plus years and seen things that would break most beings, completely does not cry. He comes very close. She throws her arms around him immediately, the natural motion of someone who has spent weeks terrified for a person she loves. Ani, thank the Force you're safe. I've been watching the battle. I saw the invisible hand come down. I thought, I'm here, Luke says. His arms come around her and he holds her carefully, with a gentleness that makes Padme pause slightly because Anakin's embraces are never cautious. They're always the embrace of someone who has been afraid of losing something and needs to confirm through physical contact that it's still there. This is different. This is someone holding something precious with full awareness of exactly how precious it is. She pulls back and looks at his face. Ani, what's wrong? Nothing, Luke says. Nothing is wrong. He means it with a completeness that surprises him. His mother is alive. She's standing in front of him, young and strong and whole, and the twins she's carrying are alive too. He can feel them, two tiny lights in the Force, one of them carrying a specific resonance that he recognizes with a shock that nearly staggers him, because it's him, it's the Force signature he's lived inside his entire life, currently existing as an unborn child in his mother's womb. I'm just grateful I keep thinking about how close it was. It was close, Padme agrees, taking his hands and pulling him inside. Obi-Wan cummed me. He said you kept Count Dooku alive, that you refused the Chancellor's suggestion to execute him. Obi-Wan calmed you already? He wanted to make sure I knew you were safe before the official report started coming through. She looks at him with the sharp political intelligence that made her queen at 14. He also said you were acting strangely. His words were competent in a way that I find somewhat alarming. Luke makes a mental note to appreciate Obi-Wan's precision with language. I had clarity today. Everything felt very clear. They settle on the veranda overlooking the city. C-3PO brings tea and then retreats with the tact of a protocol droid who has learned that some conversations require privacy. The sun continues its descent and Coruscant's lights begin to assert themselves against the darkening sky. Luke reaches out with the Force and feels the twins again. He does it carefully, quietly, not wanting to alarm Padme with something she can't sense. Two presences, the one that is him, his past self, his origin, the version of himself that in another timeline will grow up on a desert planet with no knowledge of who he is. And beside that presence, slightly different in quality, stronger in a specific way that will manifest as iron political will and physical courage, Leia. He places his hand gently on Padme's abdomen. She goes still with surprise. Ani? They're beautiful, he says. He can't help it. The emotion moves through his careful composure like water through sand. They? Ani, how do you? We haven't told anyone. How did you? I felt them. Force sensitivity. It runs in the family. He looks up at her. Twins. Padme stares at him. Then, slowly, the shock becomes something softer. I've known for 3 weeks. I've been trying to find the right moment to tell you. She pauses. Are they all right? In your feeling? They're perfect, Luke says. Strong, healthy, they're going to be extraordinary people. Padme's expression holds a complicated mixture of joy and the specific anxiety of a woman who has been carrying a secret in the middle of a war. Annie, I've been terrified. We're not supposed to... The code says... The code is wrong about attachment, Luke says. He says it simply, without heat, as someone states a fact they've verified over a lifetime of experience. It always has been. Love isn't the enemy of balance. Fear of losses. Possessiveness. But love itself is not darkness, Padme. It's the furthest thing from it. Padme looks at him for a long time. You really are different today. I need to tell you something, Luke says. It's going to sound impossible, but I need you to hear it and trust me. All right, I had a vision. The Force showed me the future, not a possible future, a specific one. Where you die, where our children are taken from us before they even know our names, where the Republic falls and becomes something terrible, and it stays terrible for decades, and billions of people suffer. He watches her face process this, and I saw why it happens. I saw every step of the path that leads there, and I know how to stop it. How? By telling the truth about the people who've been lying to all of us. He holds her gaze, the Chancellor, Padme, Palpatine. Her expression shifts, years of political instinct activating. What about him? He's been running both sides of this war. He manufactured the separatist crisis. He commissioned the clone army through intermediaries and implanted control devices in every soldier. Devices that can force them to execute any order, including killing Jedi. He has a plan to use the war, the emergency powers the Senate has granted him, and those clone soldiers to transform the Republic into an empire and eliminate the Jedi Order completely. Padme is quiet. Luke has presented this as information, not emotion, because she is a politician and politicians respond to evidence and logic before they respond to feeling. He watches her working through it, cross-referencing, testing it against what she already knows. I've been saying for years that he's accumulating too much power, she says finally, that the emergency powers were a mistake, that the Senate was giving away its own authority. She pauses. If what you're saying is true, how do you know? Visions aren't, because the vision was complete, because I've already found evidence that confirms the first part of it, the control chips in the clones. I'm going to prove it, but I need your help. He takes her hands. I need you to trust me when I do things that seem extreme. When I push against people and institutions that appear safe, will you do that? She looks at him, this strange version of the man she loves, sitting with a stillness Anakin has never possessed, looking at her with eyes that carry 60 years of knowledge and grief and love. What happened to you up there? She asks quietly. On that ship, because you came back different. I came back wiser, Luke says. It's enough for now. She nods, takes a breath. All right, what do you need me to do? The Council clash, attachment is not the enemy. The Jedi Temple at morning. Luke walks its corridors with Obi-Wan toward the Council chamber and tries not to let the familiarity overwhelm him. He has walked this temple in his own timeline, walked its ruins on Coruscant, walked its ghost in the Force, studied its history until he could reconstruct floor plans from memory. Walking it whole, functioning, filled with the living Force signatures of thousands of Jedi is something he has dreamed about without fully realizing he was dreaming. I want to prepare you, Obi-Wan says, for the possibility that the Council is going to be somewhat difficult. About Dooku being alive. Among other things, your behavior yesterday was, I'm trying to find the diplomatic phrasing. Unusual? I was going to say historically anomalous. Obi-Wan glances at him. You were efficient in a way that made me feel somewhat redundant, which I found unexpectedly confronting. You flew a burning capital ship through a planet's atmosphere. You disarmed a Sith Lord without taking his hands. And when the Chancellor suggested executing a defeated prisoner, you said no with the tone of someone declining a second helping of dinner. All reasonable choices. Anakin, you don't make reasonable choices. It's one of the defining characteristics of our relationship. Luke almost laughs. It rises unexpectedly, the genuine warmth of hearing Obi-Wan Kenobi being precisely, gently Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm working on it. The council chamber holds 12 Jedi Masters arranged in a circle, Coruscant's skyline visible through the windows behind them. Yoda in his small chair, ancient and present. Mace Windu with his Shatterpoint perception already active, reading the fault lines of the situation. Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and the others whose faces Luke knows from records, and from the later Jedi he trained who carried their teachings forward. He stands in the center and feels Yoda's gaze on him like pressure. The ancient Grandmaster's Force perception, 900 years deep, is probing gently at the edges of his presence. Luke holds his internal camouflage carefully. He isn't hiding the darkness. He has no darkness to hide, but he is managing the specific quality of his Force presence that might otherwise read as someone much older than Anakin Skywalker's 22 years. Well done, Knight Skywalker, Mace says. The Shatterpoint Master's eyes are steady on him. Already working. The rescue of the Chancellor was successful. Your decision to keep Count Dooku alive for interrogation was unconventional, but defensible. Thank you, Master Windu. Your combat performance was noted by multiple Jedi on the scene. Several have filed reports. Mace pauses. Unusual reports. I fought well, Luke says simply. You fought, Mace says carefully, like someone who has been fighting for considerably longer than 10 years. Yoda's ears rise slightly. His eyes half close in the specific way that means he's reaching through the Force rather than relying on what his eyes tell him. Luke feels the probe gently touching his surface. He lets Yoda find what Yoda finds. The deep calm, the genuine care for everyone in this room, the absence of the anger and fear that define Anakin's Force presence normally. He cannot fully hide that something fundamental is different. He doesn't try to. He trusts that what Yoda finds will not be alarming enough to derail what needs to happen next. Yoda says nothing, his eyes open. He looks at Luke with an expression that contains a question he doesn't yet know how to phrase. Masters, Luke says, I need to tell you what the Force has shown me. He gives them the vision, not the full truth. Not yet, not in these terms, because the Council will not believe the full truth until they have evidence, and the evidence requires time to assemble. He tells them a vision of the Jedi Order's fall, of the clones turning on their generals, of a Sith Lord so deeply embedded in the Republic's power structure that by the time the Jedi recognize him, it's too late. He tells them about Order 66. He tells them about the inhibitor chips. The Council's reaction is predictable, and Luke has already thought through every objection. Ki-Adi-Mundi. The clone army is loyal to the Republic. The clone army, Luke says, is loyal to whoever activates the chips in their brains. Those are different things. Plo Koon, we have received no intelligence indicating control devices in clone soldiers, because the intelligence was buried by the people who put them there. ARC Trooper Fives discovered this and was killed before he could present his findings to the Council. I intend to verify it today, with physical evidence. Mace Windu, and this Sith Lord embedded in the Republic's power structure. Did your vision show you his identity? Luke meets Mace's eyes. The Shatterpoint Master is watching him with the focus of a surgeon. The vision wasn't complete on that point, Luke says, which is technically true in the sense that he is choosing his words to technically be true while not yet naming Palpatine. He needs the chip evidence first. He needs Dooku's testimony first. He needs physical proof to accompany the accusation, or the Council, who have trusted Palpatine for decades, will dismiss it as Anakin's overactive imagination and the Force vision of an emotional young knight. The accusation without evidence doesn't stop Palpatine, it just warns him. Masters, Luke continues, I want to raise something else, something I believe is connected to why the Jedi are vulnerable to what's coming. Speak, Yoda says. The code's prohibition on attachment. The room changes. Not dramatically, these are Jedi Masters, professionals in emotional regulation. But Luke has lived long enough and studied people carefully enough to read the microscopic shifts. Mace's jaw tightens. Ki-Adi-Mundi straightens slightly. Obi-Wan, standing behind Luke, goes very still in a way that suggests he is carefully not reacting. The code says, there is no emotion, there is peace. Luke says, I've been thinking about what that means and what it was meant to prevent. It was meant to prevent jealousy, possessiveness, the fear of loss that makes a Jedi vulnerable to manipulation. Those are real dangers. I'm not dismissing them. Then what are you suggesting? Mace asks. I'm suggesting that we've been teaching the solution wrong. We tell Padawans to suppress emotion, to deny attachment, to treat love as a liability. But suppression isn't mastery. A Jedi who has suppressed emotion hasn't defeated it. They've buried it where it can't be examined and addressed, where it can fester, where someone like a Sith manipulator can find it and use it because the Jedi themselves don't even know it's there. The chamber is quiet. Luke continues. The vision I had showed me Jedi falling to the dark side not because they loved too much, but because they were never taught to process grief, to accept loss, to hold love without grasping at it. They fell because when the moment of crisis came, they had no tools. We gave them a prohibition and called it wisdom. But a prohibition is not a tool, it's an absence. Yoda speaks for the first time since the opening of this debate. His voice is thoughtful, genuinely thoughtful, not the evaluating a student thoughtful Luke knows from other contexts. Meditate on this I have, for many years. Wrong, you are not, young Skywalker. Mace turns to Yoda with barely disguised surprise. Too rigid, we have become, Yoda continues. Too certain, felt it, I have. But act on this feeling. I have not. He looks at Luke directly, but say this openly, before this council, you do. When and why did this clarity come to you? On the invisible hand, Luke says, it's the truest answer he can give. I had a moment of complete clarity. I saw what we are and what we could be, and I decided I was done with the gap between those things. Plo Koon speaks in support. Compassion cannot be separated from connection, and connection requires some form of attachment. Ki-Adi-Mundi argues for caution. The code has preserved the order for millennia. Mace listens with his Shatterpoint ability running continuously, reading the fault lines, trying to determine whether Skywalker is a critical point of transformation or of catastrophic failure. He cannot tell. The Shatterpoint is too complex, too bright, pointing toward consequences beyond his ability to map. Luke doesn't push for a resolution today. He's planting. The code reform will take time, and he has more immediate crises to manage. He bows to the council, accepts Yoda's instruction to meditate carefully and report anything further, and leaves. In the corridor, Obi-Wan falls into step beside him. They walk in silence for 30 seconds. Then Obi-Wan says, Who are you? Your former Padawan, Luke says. My former Padawan agrees with Ki-Adi-Mundi about twice a decade and spends the rest of the time trying to get the last word. You just delivered a philosophical treatise on emotional mastery to the full Jedi Council and Yoda agreed with you. Yoda agreed because I was right. That's not Obi-Wan stops walking. Anakin, look at me. Luke stops and turns. Obi-Wan's blue eyes are searching, the way they search when he's trying to read a situation that isn't presenting itself clearly. Something happened to you on that ship. Not the battle. Something else. And I am going to need you to tell me what it was. Not today, perhaps. But soon. Soon, Luke agrees. And then because Obi-Wan deserves something true even if he doesn't yet deserve the full truth. I promise you it's nothing to fear. Whatever I am right now, whatever I've become, I'm not dangerous to you or to this order. I'm the opposite. Obi-Wan holds his gaze for a long moment, then nods. All right, what do you need from me today? Come with me to the 501st Barracks. I need a witness for what I'm about to find. The army betrays itself. The 501st Legion Barracks occupy a dedicated section of the Coruscant military complex. A sprawling installation built to house the clone troopers who serve as the Republic's most elite ground force. Luke walks through the entrance with Obi-Wan beside him and feels the shift in the room immediately. Dozens of white-armored soldiers snap to attention at the sight of their general. The movement is precise, synchronized, automatic. 10,000 hours of conditioning expressing itself as a single coordinated motion. General Skywalker, says the voice of Captain Rex, and Luke turns toward it. Rex is exactly as Luke knows him from the historical records he studied across a lifetime. Compact, broad-shouldered, his Phase 2 helmet under his arm, his face carrying the specific quality of someone who has fought continuously for years and learned to treat survival as a professional skill rather than a fortunate accident. His eyes are sharp and direct. They're Jango Fett's eyes. Every clone has them, but Rex has done something with those eyes that most clones haven't. He's developed them into his own. Luke feels the emotion move through him and controls it carefully. This man, in another timeline, removed his own inhibitor chip because Ahsoka trusted him enough to tell him the truth. He survived Order 66. He lived decades afterward carrying the weight of what his brothers did when the chips activated, and they didn't know why. He spent years believing he had failed to protect the Jedi he served alongside. Luke will not let that happen to him. "Captain," Luke says, "I need to speak with you privately. Now!" Rex's expression processes the unusual directness and finds it acceptable. He's been following Anakin Skywalker's orders for years. Unusual directness is standard operating procedure. "This way, sir." They move to Rex's private briefing room, a small functional space with a tactical display table and walls covered in unit disposition maps. Obi-Wan enters behind Luke and Rex closes the door. 3 people in a room with information that could change the outcome of the war. "Captain," Luke says, "I need you to tell me about Fives." Rex goes still. It's not the stillness of a soldier waiting for orders. It's the stillness of a man encountering something unexpected in territory he thought he had mapped. "Sir?" "RACT 27-5555. Fives. He died on Coruscant after investigating an incident involving Clone Trooper Toop on Ringo Vinda. Before he died, he tried to report what he discovered about control chips in clone brains. Luke holds Rex's gaze steadily. "I believe he was telling the truth, and I believe he was killed to prevent that truth from reaching anyone who could act on it." The silence in the room is the silence of a man deciding how much of himself to risk on a moment he didn't see coming. "Sir," Rex says carefully, "the official investigation concluded that Fives was affected by a separatist-engineered parasite, that his behavior was the result of..." "Rex." Luke's voice is quiet but absolute. "I'm not asking you to confirm the official report. I'm asking you what you believe." Another silence, longer this time. Rex sets his helmet on the table and looks at it for a moment, then looks up. "Fives wasn't crazy, sir. I knew him, trained alongside him, watched him serve with distinction for years. What he described in those final hours, the chips, the conspiracy, the Chancellor being involved, it didn't sound like someone compromised by a parasite. It sounded like someone terrified of what they'd found and trying to get someone to listen." "Then listen to what I'm about to tell you," Luke says, "and then help me prove it." Luke explains. He tells Rex what he knows about the inhibitor chips, where they're located in the brainstem, how they were implanted during embryonic development on Kamino, what they're designed to do. He tells him about Order 66. He doesn't frame it as prophecy or vision or future knowledge. He frames it as intelligence gathered through Jedi investigation, which is close enough to the truth to be sustainable. He tells Rex that the entire Grand Army of the Republic, millions of clone soldiers, is carrying a biological trigger that can be activated by a single voice command to transform them into executioners of their own Jedi generals. Rex listens without interrupting. His face performs a sequence of controlled responses: skepticism, concern, the specific calculation of a soldier evaluating tactical information for internal consistency. Luke watches him work through it and waits. "If this is true," Rex says finally, "then every one of us is a weapon we don't know we're carrying." "Yes. And you want to verify it first? Physical evidence, medical scans, independent analysis? Something we can present to the Jedi Council that isn't my word alone. Then removal for every clone who wants it, starting with the 501st. Rex looks at Obi-Wan. The Jedi Master has been quiet throughout this exchange, listening and watching, and his expression is the expression of a man who came into this room skeptical and is becoming something else. "Master Kenobi, you believe this?" "I believe Knight Skywalker had an extraordinary day yesterday," Obi-Wan says. "And I've learned over many years that when his instincts insist on something loudly enough, the wise course is to investigate before dismissing." Rex nods slowly, reaches a decision. "The 501st has a medical facility 2 levels down. We use it for routine diagnostics. If we frame this as a follow-up investigation into the Fives incident, a standard wellness check for the unit, we can run deep tissue scans without flagging anything unusual in the system." "That works," Luke says. "Sir." Rex pauses. If you're right, if these chips are real and they can be activated remotely, then conducting unauthorized surgery to remove them would be a direct violation of our terms of service with the Kamino An contracts. The Republic doesn't own these men, Luke says. The firmness in his voice surprises Obi-Wan. They're soldiers. They're people. They were given a weapon they didn't consent to and don't know about. What we're doing isn't a violation of anything except the interests of whoever put those chips there in the first place. Rex is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "Permission to speak freely, sir, always." That's the first time I've ever heard a Jedi general say that the Republic doesn't own us. He picks up his helmet. Let's go do those scans. The medical facility is clean, functional, lit in the cold white of military installations that are designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Medical droids stand at attention. Rex assembles a group of 2,500 first troopers under the cover story of the Five's follow-up investigation. The clones file in with the disciplined compliance of men who have been obeying orders their entire lives without needing reasons. Luke watches the first scan begin. The medical droid runs the standard deep tissue sequence, moving through layer after layer of Rex's biology, mapping muscle and bone and neural tissue with the detached precision of a machine that doesn't know what it's looking for. Luke stands beside the display and uses the Force to guide his attention, feeling for the specific organic signature of the chip. Not mechanical, not cybernetic. Biological, grown into the tissue it was implanted in during development. There, stop the scan, Luke says. Magnify the brainstem region. 90-degree rotation. The medical droid complies. On the display, nestled in the neural tissue of Rex's brainstem like something that has always belonged there because it was placed there before Rex existed, is a small organic structure that does not match any standard clone anatomy. The room goes quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something changes that cannot be unchanged. Rex looks at the display. He looks at it for a long time with the specific quality of a man understanding something about himself that he cannot unlearn. "That's it," he says. His voice is steady. But there's something underneath the steadiness that Luke recognizes. The sound of a person's understanding of their own autonomy taking a fundamental hit. "That's it," Luke confirms. "Scan the others." They scan all 20. Every single clone has the same structure in the same location. The medical droid begins generating reports automatically. Designation, scan results, location of the anomaly. Luke takes each report and sets it aside. Evidence. Building the file. Echo, one of the 501st's most respected soldiers, looks at his own scan with an expression that moves through several things quickly and arrives at anger. Not the hot anger of someone reacting, but the cold anger of someone deciding. So when Five said it, he says he was right. He was completely right and they killed him for it. Yes, Luke says. He was right. Jesse, who has the Republic crest tattooed across his face as an expression of loyalty Luke finds both moving and painful given what it represents in the timeline he came from, looks at Luke with an expression that is half challenge and half desperate need for something to do with what he's just learned. "What happens now, sir?" "Now we remove them," Luke says, "for anyone who wants it removed. I'm not ordering this, I'm offering it. The surgery is delicate, but it's been done successfully. You'll need 24 hours of recovery, and you'll be free. Actually free, in a way you currently are not." He looks around the room at 20 men with Jango Fett's face and their own irreplaceable individual souls. "I want to be clear about something. What's in your head does not define you. It doesn't make you less of a soldier or less of a person. It makes you a victim of something done to you without your knowledge or consent. Removing it doesn't change who you are. It just removes a weapon someone else pointed at you from the inside." The room is quiet for 3 seconds. Rex steps forward. "I'll go first." Echo, same. Jesse, after a beat that contains everything he's processing about what Republic loyalty means now that he knows this, "Me too." One by one, all 20 step forward. Luke closes his eyes for a moment and feels the Force warm around him, which is not something the Force does literally, but is the best description he has for what he experiences when 20 people simultaneously choose their own freedom. Then his comlink activates. General Skywalker. The voice is from a Kaminoan representative he doesn't recognize, but the message content is what matters. This is Nala Se, Chief Medical Scientist of the Kaminoan cloning facilities. "We have been alerted to unauthorized medical scans of clone personnel in the 501st Legion. The inhibitor chips are proprietary Kaminoan technology developed under the terms of the original Clone Army contract. Any unauthorized tampering constitutes a breach of that contract, and we are formally demanding that You were going to get to tampering eventually, Luke says. Let me save some time. The chips are being removed. The surgery begins today. If the Kaminoan government has concerns about the welfare of the soldiers they grew, they're welcome to raise those concerns with the Jedi Council, where I will be presenting evidence of what those chips are actually designed to do. He pauses. I would suggest that the Kaminoan government carefully consider whether they want that evidence presented in a context where their role in the conspiracy is examined, or one where we treat their involvement as the involvement of parties who were themselves deceived. That choice is yours to make. But the chips are coming out either way. End transmission. Rex is looking at him. Sir, that was either very smart or going to create a significant diplomatic incident. Probably both, Luke says. Let's start the surgeries. The surgeries take most of the day. Luke coordinates with the medical droids and 2 Jedi healers he trusts, walking through the procedure for each case, using his force sensitivity to guide the precision required to extract the chip without damaging the surrounding neural tissue. It's delicate work. It requires the kind of sustained concentration that most people find exhausting, but Luke has spent 60 years building the capacity for exactly this kind of focused, sustained effort. Between procedures, he sits with the clones who are waiting for their turn. He asks them about themselves. Their names, not their numbers, their names, their preferences, their histories, what they remember from training, what they've experienced in the war. He does this not as a tactical exercise in ally building, but because they're people, and he finds them genuinely interesting, and because the easiest way to treat someone as a person is to be curious about them. Rex notices this and says nothing about it, but Luke catches him watching with an expression that contains a recalibration of something. By evening, 2,500 first soldiers have chips removed and verified clean. The physical evidence, chips in sterile containers, scan results, medical records, is documented thoroughly. Rex stands at the end of the day looking at the small container holding his own chip, and Luke can feel the exact quality of what Rex is processing. The understanding that every order he has ever followed could theoretically have been issued by this thing rather than by himself. And the corollary understanding that he will never be able to fully audit his own history through that lens. And the further corollary that this doesn't matter because who he is going forward is what he makes it. Sir, Rex says. Rex, what do we do with this? The evidence, the surgeries. If you go to the council with this, Palpatine will know the Order 66 contingency has been compromised. He'll accelerate his timeline, which means we need to move on multiple fronts simultaneously. Luke looks at him. I need you to trust me for the next 48 hours. I have a plan, but it requires everything to happen in the right sequence. And if it doesn't, it will, Luke says. Not arrogance. Certainty built from 60 years of experience and the specific advantage of knowing exactly what the opposition is planning to do, when they're planning to do it, and why. Rex nods. Then I trust you, sir. What's next? Next, Luke says, I need to find Ahsoka Tano. Recruiting ASOK, family finds a way. Ahsoka's temporary residence is in the lower levels of Coruscant, not the depths where the sun never reaches, but far enough down that the architecture shifts from Republic grandeur to functional pragmatism. The building is anonymous, chosen by someone who has learned to value not being noticed. Luke finds it by reaching through the Force for a specific signature that he has known his entire life. He found Ahsoka's Force presence in the ruins of Malachor and recognized it before he saw her because some things exist below conscious memory. He carried her presence in his awareness for decades afterward, the specific quality of it, the white blades in the Force, the mixture of Jedi training and something the Jedi Order never quite contained. Finding it here, in this city, young and whole and bright with the living Force, is one of the most disorienting experiences of a disorienting 2 days. He goes alone. He tells Obi-Wan he needs to visit an old contact and will debrief afterward, which Obi-Wan accepts with the restrained expression of a man who has learned that questioning Anakin Skywalker's mysterious solo errands is rarely worth the conversational investment. Bo-Katan Kryze is outside the building when Luke arrives, running what are clearly last equipment checks on gear that is clearly intended for an imminent departure. The Mandalorian warrior looks up at the sight of a Jedi, and her expression becomes the expression of someone who has strong and specific opinions about Jedi. Skywalker, she says. Not hostile exactly. Measuring. Bo-Katan, Luke says. Is Ahsoka inside? Is this order business? It's personal, Luke says. Bo-Katan processes this with the raised eyebrow of someone who didn't expect that answer. She steps aside, Luke enters the building, climbs 2 flights of stairs, and knocks on the correct door without needing to check any numbers. The door opens and Ahsoka Tano looks at him. She is 17 years old and has the self-possessed quality of someone who has already survived things that would break most people and come out the other side knowing exactly who they are. Her Montreal are still developing the full adult shape. Her Lekku carry the white and blue markings that are uniquely hers. Her eyes, when they're not guarded, are warm. They are currently guarded. Sky Guy, she says. It's not fully warm. It carries the careful quality of someone who left something painful and has not yet decided how to feel about the person who represents it appearing at their door. I heard about the rescue. Impressive. Keeping Dooku alive. Can I come in? She steps back to let him enter. The space is functional. A bed, a table, equipment in organized stacks. The belongings of someone who doesn't plan to stay anywhere long. Ursa Wren is in the corner polishing a piece of Mandalorian armor and excuses herself with the tact of someone who reads social situations quickly. Ahsoka crosses her arms. The posture is both familiar and heartbreaking. He has seen her stand exactly like this in the recollections of people who knew her, in the records he studied, in the specific quality of how she holds herself when she's uncertain but doesn't want to show it. What do you need, Anakin? I need you to hear something, Luke says. Something important. And then I need to ask you for help. The mission to Mandalore will wait. What I'm about to tell you is bigger than Mandalore. He sits down in the room's single chair, which is a deliberate choice, making himself lower, less imposing, creating the physical language of someone who isn't here to issue orders. First, though, I need to say something else. Okay, you were right to leave the order. Ahsoka goes very still. Not because the Jedi are wrong, Luke continues, not because what you believed when you trained as a Jedi was wrong, but because the order as it existed failed you. It failed you in a way that was inexcusable, and the response you got when you were exonerated, the offer to be readmitted as if the whole thing hadn't happened, was an institutional failure dressed up as a solution. You deserved better than that. You deserved an order that fought for you instead of one that abandoned you when the political cost of defending you became uncomfortable. He pauses. I should have fought harder. I should have stood up in that council chamber and refused to let them make you the sacrifice. I didn't, and I'm sorry. Ahsoka is looking at him with an expression that has moved through several things and arrived somewhere she wasn't expecting to be. Anakin, what is happening to you? Obi-Wan calmed me this morning. He said you were acting strange. He used the word alarming in a way that I think he meant as a compliment. I had a significant experience yesterday, Luke says. It changed my perspective rapidly and completely. What kind of experience? The kind that shows you where you've been wrong and exactly what the consequences of staying wrong are going to be. He leans forward. Ahsoka, I need to tell you something that's going to sound like the kind of thing that gets people sent to the halls of healing for evaluation, but I need you to hear it out and trust that I'm not compromised or delusional. All right, she says slowly. Luke tells her. He tells her about Order 66, what it is, how it will be executed, what happens to the Jedi across the galaxy when it's activated. He tells her about the chips in the clones. He tells her about the 500 first surgeries he performed today, the physical evidence now sitting in a secure facility. He tells her about Palpatine. Ahsoka listens the way she has always listened when something matters, with her entire attention, her force senses open, testing what she hears against what she feels. She doesn't interrupt. She processes as he speaks, and he can feel her doing it. When he finishes, she says, "The chips. You have physical evidence. In hand. Verified by medical scans and independent analysis. 2,500 first soldiers successfully cleared. The evidence is documented. And Palpatine is Darth Sidious. Yes. You know this for certain. I know it for certain." Ahsoka is quiet. Luke waits. He gives her the time she needs because she deserves the time she needs and because pushing her would be exactly the wrong instinct. I've always felt something wrong around him, she says finally. When I was in the temple, whenever he would visit, or whenever his name came up in council discussions, something that I could never name, I thought it was just my own distrust of politicians. She pauses. It wasn't. No, you're asking me to stay on Coruscant, delay the Mandalore mission. I'm asking you to consider that if Order 66 is transmitted while you're on that ship with Rex and the 332nd Company and their chips are still in place, you will die. I know what happens, Ahsoka. I've seen it, and I'm telling you that your survival is not negotiable to me. Ahsoka's expression shifts at this. It moves through something complicated and arrives somewhere that is not quite composure but is trying to be. Again? She says quietly. What? You said I'm not going to lose you again, earlier, on the comms when you reached out today. I've been thinking about that word. Again. Her eyes are direct, searching. You've never lost me, Anakin. I left the Order. That's not the same as being lost. Luke is quiet for a moment. He chose that word without thinking, because in his own timeline, Ahsoka has been lost and found and lost again repeatedly, and each instance of it has cost something irreplaceable. You're right, he says. Poor word choice. What I meant is, you matter to me in a way that makes the word again feel appropriate even when it technically isn't. That's a very strange thing to say. I've been saying strange things for 2 days. Ahsoka almost smiles. It's slight and brief and she brings it back under control quickly, but it's there. The 332nd Company. Rex mentioned chips before we left for this mission. I dismissed it as him processing grief over fives. Now you're telling me they have the same problem. They need the surgery, all of them. I can help coordinate, but I need your authority to order the scans without creating a political incident that reaches Palpatine before we're ready to confront him. You're asking me to trust that you have this under control. I'm asking you to trust that I understand what's at stake. Not control, nobody controls something this large. But I understand the shape of it. I know where the critical points are. And I know that having you alive and on our side is one of the things that makes the difference. Ahsoka looks at him for a long moment. The force between them is doing something that would require a Jedi scholar to fully describe, not a connection exactly because they're not fully known to each other in this moment, but a recognition. Two people in the same room who carry knowledge of the same grief from different directions. What do you need me to do specifically, she asks. Luke outlines it. He needs her to authorize the medical scans for the 332nd under the same Fives follow-up framing he used with the 501st. He needs her to keep Bo-Katan informed but contained. The Mandalorian mission needs to be suspended without creating a rift with Bo-Katan that damages the alliance they'll need later. He needs Ahsoka to be present at the Senate session that's coming when they move against Palpatine publicly, because Ahsoka's testimony as a former Jedi who left the Order on principle will carry a specific weight that Jedi testimony alone won't. And Maul, she asks? Maul is dangerous, Luke says, but he's not the war. He's a symptom of the war. When Palpatine falls, the structure that kept Maul's activities covered by the Separatist conflict collapses. He becomes a regional problem instead of a strategic one. Ahsoka considers this. Then she asks the question that tells Luke she's been thinking about this from the moment he started talking. The vision you say you had, what exactly did you see? Everything, Luke says quietly. I saw the Order fall. I saw the Republic become an empire. I saw the galaxy suffer for decades under a tyrant who used fear and violence as the only tools of governance. I saw what happened to the people I love. He pauses, and I decided I wasn't going to let it happen. One vision did all that. It was a comprehensive vision. Ahsoka studies his face the way she has always studied things, not just with her eyes, but with the Force, with the instinct she developed across years of missions, where reading people quickly was the difference between survival and its alternative. You're different, she says. Deeper. It's like looking at Anakin but hearing someone else. I've changed, Luke says, genuinely and fundamentally. I know that's disorienting. I know it probably makes you uncertain about who you're actually agreeing to help. Does it matter if you can stop what you're describing? It matters to me that you're choosing to help based on accurate information. She's quiet for another moment. Then she uncrosses her arms. A small movement, but Luke has been reading people for 60 years and he knows what it means. I'm in, she says. What about Bo-Katan? Tell her the truth. Partial truth. Tell her the Mandalore mission is being delayed because of a credible threat to the Republic that requires resolution first. Tell her Maul will be dealt with when this is over. She won't like it. She never likes anything, Ahsoka says, and this time the smile stays long enough to count. When do we start? The 332nd scans begin tomorrow morning. Coordinate with Rex. He'll provide the medical personnel. I need you focused on that while I handle the next phase. Which is Palpatine, Luke says. I'm going to face him directly. I'm going to tell him I know. Ahsoka stares at him. That sounds like a way to die. It sounds like that, Luke agrees. But it serves a purpose. He needs to know his timeline has been compromised. It forces him to activate contingencies earlier than he planned, while we're more prepared than he expects, and it tells me how much he's already adjusted for the changes he's noticed in my behavior. And if he decides the easiest solution is to just kill you, he won't, Luke says. Not yet. He's invested too much in Anakin Skywalker specifically. He'll try to turn it, try to bring me back to the path he planned. He won't abandon the asset until he's certain the asset is irrecoverable. That's a very cold way to talk about your own life. It's an accurate assessment, Luke says. He stands. Get some sleep, Ahsoka. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. He moves toward the door. Behind him, Ahsoka says, Anakin. He stops, turns. Thank you, she says, for what you said earlier about the council, about fighting for me. She pauses. Nobody's ever said that to me, not like that. Luke feels the weight of everything he knows about what she will become. The exile, the wars, the decades of working alone, the extraordinary person she grows into through all of that difficulty. He feels the specific ache of knowing that in the timeline he came from, she did all of that without anyone in this period fighting for her the way she deserved. You deserved it then, he says. You deserve it now, you always will. He leaves before she can see that the emotion behind those words is something larger than the conversation they just had. The trap for Sidious, I know who you are, the galaxy's opera house is exactly as Luke knows it from the historical records. A masterwork of Coruscant architecture, all sweeping curves and luminous panels, built to house the grandest performances the Republic's cultural elite can commission. Tonight, it hosts a Mon Calamari ballet, something called Squid Lake, which Luke finds both charming and slightly absurd. And the Chancellor has extended a personal invitation to Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker. Luke accepted. He sits beside Palpatine in the Chancellor's private box, overlooking the stage below where elegant aquatic performers move through choreography that the audience finds beautiful, and Luke's mind processes his backdrop while his Force senses are entirely focused on the being sitting 4 feet to his right. Darth Sidious. The full awareness of what he's sitting next to is something that operates below conscious thought, a constant pressure in the Force, like being in close proximity to a dark star. The darkness Palpatine radiates is not obvious, not crude. It has been refined across decades of concealment into something so thoroughly integrated with his normal Force presence that a Jedi examining him casually would find nothing conclusive. But Luke is not examining him casually. Luke has spent 60 years developing Force perception that Yoda himself acknowledged exceeded anything he'd encountered, and what Luke feels radiating from Sheev Palpatine makes the hair on Anakin's arms stand up. Ancient, cold, patient, vast, and underneath all of it, in this moment, something newer, suspicion. Palpatine knows something has changed. He's been watching Anakin for 2 days and finding a person who doesn't match his precise model of who Anakin Skywalker should be. The eagerness for approval is wrong. The emotional volatility is wrong. The quality of the Force presence is subtly wrong in a way he can feel but can't fully define. He has the attention of a predator who has noticed something unexpected in the behavior of prey it thought it understood completely. Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? Palpatine says. He says it with his face arranged in the specific configuration of a man making casual conversation at a cultural event. But Luke has lived 60 years and studied Palpatine's manipulation methodology with the thoroughness of someone who spent decades as his weapon. He knows exactly what this question is. It's a probe, a test of whether Anakin responds with the ignorance and hunger that the real Anakin would have shown at this moment. I have actually, Luke says. He keeps his voice easy, conversational, matching Palpatine's register. A Sith Lord who could prevent death itself, who could create life by manipulating midi-chlorians. His apprentice killed him in his sleep, having learned everything the master had to teach. A pause, short enough that most people would miss it. I'm impressed, Anakin. Most Jedi wouldn't know such obscure history. I've been doing a great deal of reading lately, Luke says, about the Sith, their philosophy, their methods. Their history. He pauses, looking at the performance below, and lets the next words arrive as naturally as any other part of the conversation. Their lies. Another pause. Different quality. Lies? The Sith offer power, Luke says. They promise that the dark side provides strength, certainty, the ability to protect what matters. But it's never actually true, is it? Every Sith apprentice in history has been expendable to their master. The whole design of the Rule of Two means that the apprentice is always a tool. Always replaceable. Plagueis trusted his apprentice. Look how that ended for him. Palpatine's face has not changed. This is remarkable and confirms what Luke already knew. Palpatine's emotional control is extraordinary, the product of a discipline refined across a lifetime of deception. But the Force doesn't lie the way faces do, and what Luke feels radiating from the man beside him has shifted. The suspicion has increased, the calculation has intensified. You speak as if you have personal experience with Sith psychology, Palpatine says. Luke turns to look at him directly. Palpatine looks back with the warm eyes of a concerned grandfather. Luke sees straight through to what's behind them. I know who you are, Sidious, Luke says. The opera plays on below. The audience watches the performance. On the stage, Mon Calamari performers execute movements of extraordinary grace, and nobody in the galaxy's opera house is watching anything except two people in a private box having a conversation that will determine the fate of the galaxy. Palpatine's face completes a slow transformation, not sudden, that would be admitting surprise, and Palpatine does not admit surprise. It's gradual, deliberate, the removal of a mask performed with the care of someone who intends to pick it up again afterward. The warmth recedes. The grandfatherly concern recedes. What remains is something much older and much colder. Anakin, he says. His voice has found a different register. Still measured, still precise. These are dangerous words. Are they accusations if they're true? Luke says. You orchestrated this war from both sides. You created the separatist movement through Count Dooku, your apprentice, who operated under the Sith name Tyrannus. You funded and directed the creation of the clone army through Sifo Dyas, who you then had eliminated. You've been accumulating emergency powers through the Senate for years with the specific intention of using them to transform the Republic into an empire. And you have a contingency order, Order 66, embedded in control chips in every clone soldier's brain, designed to activate them as executioners of the Jedi Order at your command. The box is very quiet. Below, the performance continues, music rising and falling, the audience utterly unaware. Palpatine looks at him with the expression of a man seeing a situation he needs to understand before he decides how to handle it. Even if this fantasy were accurate, he says, you have no proof. I have 20 chips in sealed containers, Luke says. Removed from 2,500 first soldiers after medical scans confirmed their existence and purpose. I have the medical records. I have the Camino and authorization trail that leads back to your office. I have Count Dooku in custody, and he's been persuaded that cooperation is his best available option. I have an emergency Senate session scheduled for the day after tomorrow, at which Senator Amidala and Senator Organa will present this evidence before the full body. The yellow eyes surface for just a moment, Palpatine's control slipping fractionally before he brings it back. You've been busy. I have, Luke agrees. Since yesterday morning. It's remarkable what's possible when you know exactly what to look for. And where did this knowledge come from? Palpatine asks. The question is casual, but Luke can feel the intensity behind it. This is the question that matters most to Palpatine. He can handle evidence, can handle exposed plans. He has contingencies for those. What he cannot immediately calculate for is a changed Anakin Skywalker who seems to have known things he shouldn't know before finding proof of them. The Force showed me, Luke says, a complete vision of the future you were building. I saw your empire, I saw what it cost, and I decided that cost was unacceptable. Palpatine is still for a moment. Luke can feel him running calculations. The man's intelligence is extraordinary. He is processing the implications of a Force vision detailed enough to expose his plans, evaluating the reliability of such visions, considering whether Anakin's changed behavior since yesterday morning is consistent with having received a revelation of that magnitude. You're not Anakin Skywalker, Palpatine says. It's not an accusation. It's a hypothesis stated aloud for testing. I'm in Anakin Skywalker's body, Luke says. I have his memories. I have his skills. I have his midichlorian count and his Force connection. Whether that makes me Anakin Skywalker is a philosophical question I'll leave to the scholars. The yellow eyes are fully visible now. Palpatine has made a decision. You realize that coming here and telling me this was either very brave or very foolish. Or very deliberate, Luke says. You needed to know that your Order 66 contingency has been compromised. You needed to know that the evidence trail you thought was buried has been excavated. You needed that information because without it, you would activate contingencies on a timeline that could hurt people I care about. I'm giving you the information because I'm giving you the choice to face what's coming in an orderly way. He pauses, and because I wanted you to understand, personally, that the weapon you spent years building is the thing that's going to stop you. Palpatine stares at him. For the first time in this conversation, Luke feels something from the dark side presence beside him that he doesn't expect. Not fear exactly, something adjacent to it. The recalibration of a being who has never genuinely been surprised in decades encountering a genuine surprise. You think 4 Jedi and some chips can stop me? The warmth is completely gone. The voice that remains is the voice of Darth Sidious, ancient and cold and certain. Not 4, Luke says, standing. And not chips. The truth stops you. The truth delivered to the Senate with evidence and witnesses, in a context where there is no emergency powers clause to prevent a response and no Order 66 to eliminate the only force that could challenge you. The truth stops you. I'm just the one delivering it. He meets Palpatine's eyes one final time. Enjoy the rest of the performance, Chancellor. It's the last one you'll attend as a free man. He leaves. Behind him, Palpatine sits in the private box while the Mon Calamari performers continue their ballet below, and his face is the face of a man activating every contingency he has. The 332ND and the final preparation. The next day unfolds across multiple simultaneous operations, with the precision of a military campaign, which is what it is. Ashoka coordinates the 332nd Company scans from the military medical facility Rex secured. The process is smoother the second time. Rex has briefed the medical personnel, the framing is established, the equipment is ready, 64 clone soldiers file through, and every single one presents the same organic structure in the same location. 64 chips are scheduled for removal over the following 24 hours. Ahsoka moves through the operation with focused efficiency, and Luke, who passes through twice to assist with the more complex cases, watches her work and feels the specific pride of someone watching a person they love operate at the peak of their capability. She catches him watching at one point. "Stop looking at me like that," she says. "Like what? Like I remind you of someone." "You do remind me of someone," Luke says honestly. "Someone extraordinary. You'd like her." Ahsoka looks at him for a moment longer than the exchange requires, then returns to the procedure she was supervising, and Luke continues to the next room. Obi-Wan has been assigned by Luke's gentle direction to securing Dooku's testimony. This required a conversation that Luke approached carefully. He told Obi-Wan enough to explain why Dooku's cooperation was essential: the Senate session, the evidence package, the need for a Sith Lord's first-hand account of Palpatine's conspiracy. He did not tell Obi-Wan about the Opera House confrontation. He will tell him soon, but not before the Senate session, because Obi-Wan's response to learning that Luke walked into a room with Darth Sidious and told the Sith Lord that he knew everything will be an extended conversation about tactical wisdom that Luke genuinely doesn't have time for right now. Obi-Wan sits across from Dooku in a secure interrogation room and conducts the most important interview of his career with the patient thoroughness that is one of the things Luke has always admired most about him. Dooku cooperates. Not fully at first. There is an initial period where he tests the edges of what's being asked, evaluates what cooperation actually means in this context, calculates his options. But Luke's words in the hangar on the invisible hand have done their work. The offer, cooperation in exchange for truth rather than execution in exchange for convenience, is the only viable path available to Dooku, and Dooku is too intelligent not to recognize that. By midday, Dooku has provided the full structure of his communication channels with Palpatine, dating back to his recruitment as Darth Sidious' apprentice, the financial architecture of the Separatist movement's funding, and its ultimate source in Republic Chancellor's Office accounts, the original arrangement with Sifo Dyas and the subsequent cover-up of that Jedi Master's death, and his personal account of the Clone Wars' manufactured origins. All of it recorded, documented, sealed with force compulsion verification that ensures its admissibility in any Republic legal proceeding. Obi-Wan emerges from the interrogation room with the expression of a man who has just had his understanding of the last several years comprehensively dismantled. He finds Luke in the corridor. "Palpatine," he says. His voice is very controlled. "Yes," Luke says. "The entire war. Both sides. The whole time." Obi-Wan is quiet for a moment that contains several years of retrospective recalculation. "How long have you known?" "Since the invisible hand," Luke says. "Since the vision." "You might have mentioned it. I needed evidence before I could mention it. A Jedi Knight telling the Council that the beloved Chancellor is a Sith Lord without evidence is a Jedi Knight who gets medically evaluated and quietly removed from active duty while Palpatine continues his plans uninterrupted." Obi-Wan processes this. "That's frustratingly logical. I've been working on it. What happens now?" "Now we go to the Council," Luke says. "Tonight. Before the Senate session tomorrow. They need to hear everything. The chips, Dooku's testimony, my confrontation with Palpatine. I went to the Opera House last night and told him directly that I know. He's activating contingencies. We need the Council ready to move." Obi-Wan stares at him. "You went to the Opera House and told Darth Sidious. Tonight, Master Kenobi." Council session tonight. We are absolutely having a longer conversation about this, Obi-Wan says with remarkable composure, and Luke is once again struck by how much he loves this man who was his first teacher in a timeline that no longer exists. Bail Organa receives Luke's communication in the early afternoon and by evening has reviewed the evidence package, consulted with Padme Amidala, and agreed to co-sponsor the emergency Senate session. He receives the information with the specific quality of a man who has been half expecting something like this, and is simultaneously validated and horrified to be right. Padme, who already knew, focuses immediately on the political architecture, which senators need to be briefed before the session, which are Palpatine loyalists who will attempt procedural interference, how to structure the evidence presentation for maximum impact in a chamber where Palpatine has spent years cultivating goodwill. She and Luke speak by comlink in the late afternoon. The financial records are the strongest element, she tells him. Her voice carries the focused precision of someone doing what she does best. They're verifiable independently. The chips are physical evidence that can be examined. Dooku's testimony is powerful but will be challenged. He's a Sith Lord making accusations that benefit him. The financial records are clean. Lead with the chips, Luke says. Show the Senate something they can hold in their hands and look at, physical evidence of a control device implanted in every soldier they've been trusting with their lives. That's not a philosophical argument. That's something in a container. Agreed, Padme says. Rex is willing to testify. Rex is willing to do more than testify. He'll have the chip that came out of his own head. He'll stand in front of the Senate and put it on the table. A pause. Annie. Her voice shifts, becomes something other than political briefing. Are you sure about this? Once this starts, once we stand up in the Senate chamber and say these words in front of every camera in the Republic, there's no taking it back. We don't want to take it back, Luke says. We want to be exactly that visible. Palpatine's power comes from secrecy. Exposure is his weakness. The more public this is, the harder it is for him to eliminate witnesses or suppress evidence. And if he attacks, right there in the Senate chamber, then every being in the galaxy watching the HoloNet sees exactly who he is, Luke says, which is what we need. Another pause. Luke, she says, and then stops. He goes still. She used his name. Not Anakin. Luke. Padme. I've been saying it in my head for 2 days, she says quietly, since our conversation. Whatever is in that body, whatever you actually are, I keep thinking of you as Luke. Is that? It's accurate, he says. His voice is careful, gentle, holding the full weight of what this moment costs him. I'm your son, Padme, living in your husband's body, making choices he didn't get to make. And I need you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the Senate session costs, you are worth every moment of this. You are always worth it. The silence on the comlink is the silence of someone who has received information too large to process in the moment, who is choosing to set it aside and hold it for later when there is space to feel it properly. Come home tonight, she says finally, before the council session. The children need you close. Luke closes his eyes briefly. The twins, not yet born, present in the Force like two small stars. His past self, his sister, alive and safe and carrying no knowledge of what the world contains because they haven't entered it yet. I'll be there, he says. The council session, everything is revealed. The Jedi Temple at night is a different thing than the Jedi Temple in daylight. The activity reduces, the training chambers go quiet, and the force that flows through the building settles into the deep contemplative rhythm that a 10,000-year tradition of Jedi presence has worn into the stone itself. Luke walks toward the council chamber and feels it all around him and understands for the first time, with the body he's wearing, why this place was so difficult for his father to leave. The council assembles. Yoda, Mace Windu, Obi-Wan, Ki Adi-Mundi, Plo Koon, Agan Kolar, Saesee Tiin, Kit Fisto, the full body, because what Luke told Obi-Wan on the way in, everything, warranted calling everyone. Luke presents the evidence in sequence. Physical first, the chips in their sterile containers, the medical scan records, the documentation of 2,500 first surgeries, and 64 scheduled 330-second procedures. Dooku's testimony next, the recorded sessions, the financial records, the structural history of the manufactured war. Then, the confrontation at the Opera House. When he tells them about the Opera House, Obi-Wan closes his eyes briefly with the expression of a man who was promised a longer conversation and is managing his feelings about the timing. When he tells them that Palpatine is Darth Sidious, the Council's reaction is the most controlled crisis response he has ever witnessed. These are people trained across decades to regulate their emotional responses to impossible information. They process, they question, they challenge. Ki-Adi-Mundi wants independent verification. Plo Koon notes that the financial records need Republic auditors to confirm. Ajin Kohler asks about Palpatine's Force capabilities. Sacy Tin asks why Palpatine would let Luke walk out of the Opera House. Luke answers each question with the patience of a teacher who has conducted this kind of briefing many times before, because he has, in another context, and the skills transfer. Then Mace Windu activates his Shatterpoint ability and looks at Luke. Really looks at him, the full force of the technique deployed with the precision that only a lifetime of practice can produce. The ability to perceive critical fault lines in people and events, to see where pressure will cause transformation or collapse. The room is quiet while Mace looks. When he stops looking, his expression is not exactly what Luke expected. Not accusation or alarm. Something more like the expression of a man who has just perceived something so large and complex that categorizing it will take time he doesn't have right now. "What did you see?" Yoda asks him. "A nexus," Mace says. "The most significant shatter point I've ever perceived. Not a crack in something. A junction point. The place where multiple possible futures connect to a single cause." He looks at Luke with an expression that contains a question he doesn't know how to frame. "You're the pivot of everything. Whatever you are, whatever happened to you, you're the reason any of us are in this room right now instead of dead." Yoda's eyes are on Luke with an expression that carries 900 years of wisdom working through something it has never encountered before. "Changed, the Force is," he says quietly. "Felt it I have since 2 days ago. Like a door opened where no door was. Something came through." He doesn't confirm or deny the full nature of it. What matters now is not the mechanism of how he got here, but what happens next. "The Senate session is tomorrow," Padme's voice says. She's not in the room, but Luke set up a secure hologram channel because she needed to be part of this planning session, and he told her so. Her blue image stands in the center of the council circle with the composure of a senator who has walked into rooms that didn't want her there for 20 years. "Senator Organa and I have confirmed the emergency session. It convenes at the 9th hour. We need the Jedi Council officially represented, not as arresting officers, but as evidence presenters." "Agreed," Mace says. "But Sidious knows we're coming. He told you he'd activate contingencies." "Yes," Luke says. "Which means the order of operations matters exactly. The Senate session goes first. Evidence is presented publicly, on the record broadcast across the HoloNet. Order 66 has already been neutered. The 501st chips are removed, the 332nd is in process, and the order won't activate as a galaxy-wide event, because we've compromised the transmission infrastructure at the Camino end." He pauses. When Palpatine tries to execute Order 66 during the session and it doesn't work, his last strategic option is direct combat, which is when we need to be ready. "You expect him to fight?" Kit Fisto asks. "I expect him to have no other choice," Luke says. "Everything else will have been removed. His identity will be public, his chips will have failed, his financial structure will be exposed. His apprentice will have testified against him. He will fight because Darth Sidious has never accepted defeat as a concept." Mace considers, "Then we need the best fighters available to be present in that chamber." "Yes," Luke says, "yourself, Obi-Wan, Yoda available as a reserve. And me." Mace looks at him, the Shatterpoint vision is still active somewhere behind his eyes. "And you." "And me," Luke says. "I know his fighting style completely. I know his speed, his lightning technique, his Juyo form, his psychological manipulation tactics. I know every move he makes when he's cornered because I've studied it across a lifetime. He is the most dangerous being any of you have ever faced. But he is not unbeatable. Not today. Not with what we have." Yoda speaks from his chair. "Ready for this, are you, young Skywalker? Face Sidious in combat prepared, are you?" Luke looks at the ancient Grand Master, the being who trained his father and watched him fall. The being who trained him, in another timeline, on a swamp planet, already carrying the grief of what had happened to Anakin and the weight of knowing what Luke would need to face. "I've been ready for this my entire life," Luke says, in ways that are complicated to explain. "But yes, I'm ready." Yoda holds his gaze for a long moment, then nods. "Then tomorrow, we end this." The council session continues through the night, working through every contingency and coordination detail. The Senate session, the evidence sequence, the security positioning, the response plan for when Palpatine moves. Outside the temple, Coruscant continues its billion-person existence, unaware that in a council chamber at its highest point, The beings responsible for its protection are finalizing the plan that will either save it or fail it. Luke sits in the center of the planning session and feels the Force move through Anakin's body like wind through an open door, and he knows with the certainty of 60 years of experience and the specific grace of being given an impossible second chance that tomorrow they will not fail. The declaration, "Let the galaxy see the truth." Morning arrives over Coruscant the way it always does. Not as sunrise exactly, because a planet-spanning city doesn't experience dawn the way open land does, but as a gradual brightening of the upper atmosphere that filters down through layer upon layer of infrastructure until it reaches the Senate district as something resembling natural light. The Galactic Senate building catches it and reflects it in the specific gold that architectural historians will later describe as the last beautiful morning of the Republic era that almost wasn't saved. Luke stands on the balcony of Padme's apartment and watches the light change and breathes. He has been awake since the third hour. Not from anxiety. The Jedi training that became his foundation across a lifetime means that anxiety as a sustained state is something he processes and releases rather than carries. He's been awake because there is a quality to this morning that he wants to be present for completely. The twins stir in Padme's womb with the specific Force resonance he has come to think of as the most extraordinary thing he has experienced in either of his lives. His mother sleeps inside, her presence in the Force warm and strong and unbroken in a way that in another timeline it would never be again after today. He puts his hand on the railing and feels the city below him and lets himself understand, fully and without reservation, that he is about to walk into the most important room in the Republic's political history and either change everything or fail trying. He holds both possibilities in his awareness simultaneously. The Jedi technique for preparing for high-stakes action, feeling the full weight of consequence without being paralyzed by it. Then he lets them go. The Force will guide what it guides. He will do what he knows how to do. Padme appears in the doorway behind him. She's dressed already, the deep burgundy of formal Senate robes, her hair arranged with the professional precision of someone who has been performing political authority since she was 14 years old. She looks at his back and he feels her Force presence approach, the specific warmth of it, and she stands beside him at the railing. "How are you feeling?" she asks. "Prepared," he says. "Clear." "I've been in the Senate for years," she says. "I've given speeches that changed votes, challenged emergency powers, argued against measures that had near unanimous support. I've never felt about any of it the way I feel about what we're doing today." Frightened? Not frightened. Something larger than frightened. Like standing at the edge of something irreversible. "That's accurate," Luke says. "After today, the galaxy is different. One way or another." Padme is quiet for a moment. Then, "Rex Komet an hour ago. The 330-second procedure is complete. All 64 soldiers confirmed clear. He said to tell you that when Order 66 gets transmitted, the clones won't be the ones executing it." Luke closes his eyes briefly. 64 more people who will walk away from today as themselves rather than as instruments of something they never consented to be. Good. Bale is already at the Senate. He's been there since the 5th hour, managing the procedural setup. The session opens at the 9th hour. She pauses. Dooku is secured and ready for transport to the chamber. The evidence package is with the Senate archivists under seal. Everything is in place. "Then we're ready." Luke. She says his name the way she has said it privately for 2 days now, with the specific quality of someone who is still processing what it means to say it to the face of the man who was her husband, while knowing who is actually behind those eyes. "Whatever happens today, I want you to know that I understand what you gave up to be here, who you were before this, what it costs to walk into your father's life and make better choices than he made, and carry the knowledge of what those choices prevented." Her voice is steady with the iron composure of Naboo's finest political tradition. "I want you to know that it matters, that you matter, not just as a strategy, as a person." Luke turns to look at her, the mother he never knew, 26 years old and already fully herself. Already the senator, the idealist, the woman whose conviction about what the Republic should be never bent, despite everything that was done to break it. In another timeline, she lost the will to live in a medical bay on Polis Massa after the things Anakin did to her in the last hours of the Republic. She died before her children could know her name. Not today. "I know," he says. "And for what it's worth, you should know that in the timeline I came from, in the life where none of this happened, both your children spent their entire lives trying to build the galaxy you believed in, the Republic you fought for. Neither of them ever met you, but they became you in the ways that mattered." Padme's composure holds. But her eyes fill, briefly, before she brings them back to clarity. "Leia," she says. "Not a question. The most extraordinary senator the Republic ever had," Luke says. "Fearless, principled, absolutely impossible to intimidate. She had your exact voice when she was angry." Padme makes a sound that is half laugh, half something more complicated. She straightens, smooths her robes, resets her senatorial face. "Then we make sure she gets to be that person in a galaxy that deserves her." She turns toward the door. "Come on, we have a chancellor to expose." The Senate chamber is the largest deliberative space in the known galaxy. 10,000 delegation pods arranged in a vast sphere around a central speaking platform. The architecture designed to create the impression of a universe of voices gathered in one place. This morning it's full. Word of the emergency session spread through the Senate overnight despite attempts to keep it controlled. And every delegation that received word called their senator in, and the senators called their staff. And by the time the session opens at the 9th hour, the chamber holds more beings than it has seen since the vote on the Military Creation Act. Luke stands in the Naboo delegation pod beside Padme and Jar Jar Binks and watches the chamber fill and feels the collective force presence of thousands of beings. Anxiety, confusion, political calculation, genuine concern, washing through the space like weather. Bail Organa's pod is directly adjacent, the Alderaanian senator standing with the composed gravity of a man who has made his decision and is past the point of reconsidering it. He catches Luke's eye across the gap between pods and nods once, the nod of someone confirming a plan is still operational. In the Jedi section, Mace Windu stands with Kit Fisto and Ajin Kolar and Saesee Tiin, all four in Jedi robes rather than armor, which is deliberate. They are here as witnesses and evidence presenters, not as an arrest team. The distinction matters for the Senate's perception. Obi-Wan is positioned near the chamber entrance with 3 additional Jedi whose specific purpose is to secure the exits once the session begins. Rex is present in the public gallery with a contingent of chip-free 501st soldiers in full armor. Their presence is simultaneously practical, security for the senators if Palpatine attempts violence, and symbolic. Clone soldiers standing in the Republic's most important deliberative chamber, having chosen to be there rather than been ordered there by a chip in their heads. Ahsoka is with Padme's security detail, not in Jedi robes, she's not Jedi right now in any formal sense, but present and ready, her white-bladed lightsabers under her outer garment. At the center of the chamber, on the elevated Chancellor's platform, Sheev Palpatine sits with the practiced ease of a man who has occupied that position for so long it has become an extension of his body. His expression is the expression Luke knows from 1,000 historical records. Benevolent, concerned, the face of a leader dealing with whatever unexpected crisis his Senate is presenting today. His red-robed guards flank him. Mas Amedda stands to his right, but the force radiating from him is not benevolent. Luke, from 3 pod lengths away, feels the dark side presence that has learned to wear this man's face, and beneath the careful concealment, beneath the decades of refined hiding, there is something that was not present at the Opera House last night. Something new and cold and absolute. Palpatine has made a decision. Luke can feel it without knowing its exact content. Whatever contingency plan the Sith Lord finalized overnight, whatever his assessment of this situation produced, the decision has been made. He is not going to cooperate. He is not going to attempt a graceful political exit. He is going to force this to its conclusion. Good, Luke thinks. Let the galaxy see it clearly. The session opens. The presiding officer, Mas Amedda, which creates the immediate procedural irony of Palpatine's own aide running the session, that will expose him, calls the chamber to order. Bail Organa's pod moves to the central speaking position. "Senators of the Republic," Bail says, and his voice carries through the chamber's acoustic perfection with the weight of a man who chose his words before he walked into this building and will not be moved from them. "We are here today to address the most serious threat this democracy has faced in its 1,000-year history. That threat does not come from the separatist movement. It does not come from any external force. It comes from within our own government, from the highest position in our government." The chamber erupts, 10,000 pods generating simultaneous reaction, shouting, confusion, calls for order. Mas Amedda attempts to manage it and is largely ignored. Luke watches from the Naboo pod and lets the chaos run its natural course, because the chaos is confirmation that the information is landing. Palpatine raises one hand and his voice carries above the noise with the effortless projection of someone who has managed this room for years. "Senator Organa, these are extraordinary allegations. I would caution any senator to consider the source and the motivation before The evidence will speak to motivation, Bale says. Senator Amidala. Padme's pod moves to center position. The chamber quiets with the specific quality of an audience recognizing that something important is about to be said by someone they respect. Padme Amidala's reputation in this chamber is what it is. Built over years of fighting for positions that proved correct, of maintaining integrity when accommodation was easier, of being wrong occasionally, and acknowledging it and being right consistently enough that her credibility is one of the Senate's reliable reference points. Senators, she says, I have opposed this war from its beginning. I have said repeatedly that emergency powers were being granted too freely, that the Senate was ceding its authority to the executive, that the pace of centralization was incompatible with democratic governance. Many of my colleagues dismissed these concerns as idealism. She pauses. Today I'm going to show you that they weren't idealism. They were pattern recognition. She presents the chips. Rex's pod, arranged for access to the chamber's central display system, projects the medical scans, the deep tissue imaging of a clone trooper's brainstem, the organic structure that shouldn't be there sitting in the neural tissue, like something that has always belonged. And beside the scan image, a physical chip in a sealed transparent container that Rex holds up in his gauntleted hand so every camera in the chamber can see it clearly. This chip, Padme says, was removed from the brain of Captain CT-7567 of the 501st Legion 2 days ago. It was present in every member of the 501st subjected to medical scanning. It was present in every member of the 332nd Company. Every clone soldier we have been able to examine has this structure in their neural tissue. These chips were implanted during the embryonic development stage of clone production on Kamino. They are behavioral modification devices. They are designed to receive a specific command, Order 66, and upon receiving that command, force the clone soldier to execute all Jedi officers. She lets the silence hold for 3 seconds. The entire Grand Army of the Republic is a weapon pointed at the Jedi Order. And it was designed that way from the beginning. The chamber noise this time is different from the earlier oppression. Less chaos, more the sound of a large number of beings processing information that changes the meaning of everything they thought they understood about the last 3 years. Palpatine's voice cuts through it. Senator Amidala, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. A medical anomaly in some clone soldiers does not. Shall we discuss the financial records? Bale says. The authorization trail appears on the central display. Account numbers, transaction records, the funding pathway for the clone army that leads through intermediary accounts and shell structures, and eventually, with the thoroughness of analysis that Padme's staff worked through the night to document, to the Office of the Supreme Chancellor, not to the Republic, not to the Senate Military Oversight Committee, to Palpatine's personal discretionary accounts. The clone army, Bale says clearly, was funded and commissioned by the Chancellor's office. Not by Jedi Master Sifo Dyas acting on behalf of the Republic, as we were told. By Sheev Palpatine, the same man who, as Darth Sidious, recruited Count Dooku as his Sith apprentice and directed the creation of the separatist movement to manufacture the war that justified deploying that army. The separatist ambassadors' pods erupt. Several delegation pods begin physically removing themselves from the chamber's outer ring, which is either genuine alarm or tactical positioning. Luke watches all of it with the part of his mind that isn't monitoring Palpatine, because Palpatine is the thing that matters and everything else is context. Palpatine stands. His voice has abandoned the grandfatherly register entirely. What replaces it is still controlled, still measured, but the warmth is gone. These are fabrications. Political theater designed by Jedi who feel their influence over the Republic declining and seek to reassert it through slander. Senator Amidala, Senator Organa, you are being used as instruments of a Jedi power grab. The real threat to the Republic is not the Chancellor's office. It is the order that has placed itself above accountability. Would you like to hear from Count Dooku? Luke says. He speaks from the Naboo pod at normal volume, not amplified, but his force projection carries it perfectly to every corner of the chamber. 10,000 heads turn toward the voice. Palpatine looks at him with an expression that has removed every layer of performance and is now simply the face of Darth Sidious looking at the thing that destroyed his plan. Dooku's holographic testimony appears on the central display. The recording from Obi-Wan's interrogation, playing in full, with the Force Compulsion Verification Authentication code displayed in the corner of the frame. A former Sith Lord, in his own voice, with his own face, describing in precise and specific terms the structure of the conspiracy, the recruitment, the manufactured war, the clone army's purpose, the inhibitor chips, and the identity of the Sith Master who orchestrated it all. Chancellor Sheev Palpatine, Dooku's recorded voice says, is the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. The Senate chamber produces a sound that Luke has never heard before and suspects no living being has heard before. 10,000 beings in 10,000 pods, simultaneously encountering the information that the man they trusted with the future of civilization has been the architect of its destruction. Palpatine stands very still in the center of it. Then he does something that surprises Luke by being surprising. He laughs. Short, quiet, genuine. The laugh of a being who has been caught at something vast and finds the completeness of the exposure almost admirable. Yes, he says. The chamber goes silent. Yes, he says again. His voice has found its final register now, the real one, stripped of every performance. Ancient and cold and carrying the specific authority of a being who has never genuinely believed that anyone else's judgment mattered. I am Darth Sidious. I have been for many decades. I orchestrated this war. I built both sides of it. I will not insult this body's intelligence by continuing a pretense that has been comprehensively dismantled. He looks around the chamber with the absolute attention of someone making sure every face registers what he's about to say, and I have done all of it for one purpose: to end the chaos of this pathetic, squabbling, self-congratulating collection of competing interests that you call a democracy and replace it with something that actually functions. Order, absolute order, an empire that moves with a single will instead of 10,000 contradictory ones. He raises his hands and force lightning erupts in both directions simultaneously, slamming into the nearest Senate guard positions, throwing armored beings 15 meters backward, cracking the architecture of the nearest pods. The time for debate, Darth Sidious says, is over. 3 generations of Skywalker. The chamber response in the first 10 seconds is what chaos actually looks like when it's real. Not the organized noise of political disagreement, but the genuine panic of thousands of beings in an enclosed space. When violence erupts unexpectedly, delegation pods begin pulling back toward the outer walls automatically, their emergency systems activating. Senate guards who weren't struck by the first lightning burst take defensive positions around the chamber's exits. Senators are screaming or going silent with shock in roughly equal measure. Luke is already moving. He drops from the Naboo pod to the chamber floor the moment the lightning fires, landing in a force-cushioned crouch that absorbs the impact of a 30-meter fall as if it were nothing. His blue blade ignites. The sound of it in the massive space is the sound of a door closing on everything that came before. Mace Windu drops from the Jedi section simultaneously, his purple blade casting its distinctive light. Kit Fisto and Agen Kolar cover the flanks, moving to intercept the Red Guards who are advancing from Palpatine's platform toward the center of the chamber. Saesee Teen's green blade holds position at the primary exit, preventing Palpatine from retreating in that direction. Ahsoka's white blades appear from Padme's position, holding a defensive perimeter around the Naboo pod and the senators near it. Rex's chip-free soldiers deploy from the gallery with the precision of the 501st at its best, establishing defensive positions that channel civilian traffic toward the safe exits, while maintaining lines of engagement that prevent Palpatine's guards from moving freely. All of this happens in approximately 4 seconds. Palpatine looks at the deployment from his platform, and his expression is the expression of a being performing a final tactical evaluation. He sees the coverage, he sees the exits, he sees Luke standing between him and the chamber floor with a lit blue blade and 60 years of Grandmaster skill behind young Anakin's eyes. Then he moves. The stories about Sidious's speed do not prepare you for Sidious's speed. This is something Luke knows intellectually and now experiences as a physical fact. The dark side of the Force, when channeled by a being of Palpatine's power and discipline, produces movement that operates near the boundary of what the human visual system can track. He comes off the platform in a blur that covers 30 meters in a second, dual crimson blades appearing from concealment in his sleeves, igniting mid-leap, and he descends toward Luke with the killing fury of something that has been patient for decades and is done being patient. Luke meets the first strike. The impact when Palpatine's blade hits his is enormous. The force augmentation behind it is staggering. Raw darkside power expressed as kinetic force through the lightsaber strike. Luke absorbs it through his blade and through his stance. The Gem-So foundation of Anakin's body's trained muscle memory combining with Luke's 60 years of refined technique to create a defense that doesn't break. His feet slide 2 centimeters back. No more. Palpatine's second blade comes in at the low angle while his eyes are on the first exchange. Luke doesn't look down to track it. He feels it through the Force, steps laterally, and the crimson blade passes through the space where his leg was. "You're faster than last time," Palpatine says. He's already repositioning his geoform's trademark unpredictability, generating attack angles that change mid-strike. "Last time?" Luke asks, fully present in the duel, his blade intercepting a diagonal cut that would have gone through his shoulder. "When we've sparred before." "When I tested the edges of Skywalker's abilities." Palpatine's voice is steady despite the furious combat pace. The Dun-Moke psychological warfare is running in parallel with the physical engagement. "You're not him. I've known it for 2 days. Whatever you are, you're not the frightened young man who needed my approval." "No," Luke agrees, executing a Force-enhanced pivot that creates distance and brings him alongside Mace Windu's advancing position. "I'm not." Mace Windu engages from Palpatine's right flank, and this is where the duel transforms from a single confrontation into something more complex. Mace's Vapad form is the only lightsaber technique in the Jedi tradition that can match Sidious's dark side energy head-to-head. Vapad channels the user's own darkness, their own capacity for aggression, and redirects it as a closed loop. The more darkness the opponent generates, the more power flows into the Vapad response. Against a Sith Lord, it creates a superconducting circuit of combat energy. Palpatine shifts to handle both of them simultaneously, his twin blades generating a defensive pattern that covers multiple angles at once, his Force-enhanced speed providing the processing power to manage 2 master-level opponents. Without committing to either one fully, he kills Anakin Skywalker. It happens between Luke's second and third attack sequences. Anakin Skywalker advances on Palpatine's exposed left, moving too straight, his approach too linear. Palpatine's left blade breaks from the primary defensive pattern for a single beat in a spinning strike that crosses the gap between them with the specific velocity that killed Anakin Skywalker in another timeline, and kills him here too. The blade punching through his guard and through his chest before the Zabrak has time to complete the adjustment he started. Luke feels it through the Force, the sharp absence of a living presence, the particular violence of it. He presses his attack with increased intensity, using the emotional weight of that loss the way he learned to use emotion across a lifetime, as fuel for the Force connection, not as a driver of choices. Palpatine handles the increase in pressure. His footwork carries him backward across the chamber floor, buying space and time, his blades maintaining their defensive coverage, while his Force senses map the entire battlefield simultaneously. He is doing what Sidious always does, calculating, adapting, looking for the single point of leverage that will unravel the coordination between his opponents. He finds it. Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan has moved from his exit position to engage when Anakin Skywalker fell, his Soresu form providing the defensive anchor that his role in this fight requires. He advances with the measured precision that makes Soresu what it is, a form designed to be impossible to break, a defense so complete that aggression cannot find purchase against it. Against most opponents, Soresu is impenetrable. Palpatine doesn't attack Obi-Wan's defense. He attacks Obi-Wan's heart. He uses Force Lightning not at Obi-Wan but past him, at the Naboo delegation pod where Padme stands behind Ahsoka's defensive perimeter. The lightning streaks across the chamber in a fraction of a second, and Obi-Wan instinctively pivots to intercept it. The right choice, the protective choice, the only choice a Jedi could make when the alternative is letting it reach civilians. The pivot opens his guard for half a second. Palpatine's blade moves toward that opening with the speed of a predator that has been waiting for exactly this moment. Luke throws himself across the engagement space between them. He gets his blade in front of Palpatine's strike, and the impact drives him sideways into Obi-Wan. Both of them catching themselves against the chamber floor, and Palpatine is already moving again, using the moment to create space, his Force senses mapping the new positions and finding the configuration he needs for the next sequence. "Are you all right?" Luke says quickly. "Fine," Obi-Wan says, already back on guard. "That was... I know. Stay on his right. Don't let him create that angle again." They reform. Luke, Mace, Obi-Wan, Kit Fisto providing flanking coverage. 4 Jedi against Darth Sidious, and the mathematics of it are better than the original timeline in one critical way. Luke is not Anakin. He will not betray Mace. He will not provide the intervention that saves Palpatine from Vapad's closing grip when the moment comes. The duel moves across the chamber floor as Palpatine drives toward the central speaking platform, gaining height, using the elevated position to create engagement angles that force the Jedi to move upward. His Force lightning fires in bursts between saber sequences, not aimed at the Jedi directly but at the infrastructure of the chamber, cracking pods, destroying gallery structures, filling the air with debris that requires constant Force management to navigate safely. He's not just fighting the 4 of them. He's fighting the room. Luke reads the strategy and understands it in the third minute of combat. Palpatine cannot defeat four masters in direct engagement. He's trying to transform the battlefield into chaos complex enough that individual defenders can be isolated and eliminated one at a time. He needs to separate them. He needs confusion, debris, the panicked movement of evacuating senators providing interference, the architecture of the chamber itself as an ally. Luke will not let the room become chaos. He reaches into the Force and pulls, not at Palpatine, but at the chamber itself. The debris that Palpatine's lightning has generated begins to move in organized patterns rather than chaotic trajectories. Cleared paths for the remaining evacuees, channeled debris fields that restrict rather than assist Palpatine's movement. Structural elements reinforced against further lightning damage by the force pressure Luke applies to them. It requires sustaining attention across a vast space while continuing to fight actively, splitting his force awareness between combat and environmental management in a way that Anakin Skywalker at 22 could not have done. Luke at 60 plus in Anakin's body does it without breaking his combat rhythm. Mace notices. His Shatterpoint perception, running constantly beneath the combat, sees the environmental control and understands it and adjusts his own positioning to exploit the corridors Luke is creating. The coordination between them clicks into place without words. Two people who have never trained together finding a shared rhythm through the Force's own guidance. Palpatine feels the shift. His face, which has maintained the cold fury of a Sith Lord in full combat, shows something that takes Luke a moment to identify because he has never seen it on Darth Sidious before. Uncertainty. What are you doing? Palpatine demands, his blade still working, still generating the velocity that makes him so dangerous, but now with a quality of urgency beneath the technique that wasn't there before. Closing your options, Luke says, one at a time. He summons. Not furniture, not loose objects, the physical evidence containers that Padme's staff brought to the session, the sealed, transparent cases holding the removed chips. They fly from the evidence table and position themselves in the chamber's upper lighting array, visible to every camera still transmitting, visible to the HoloNet feed that has been broadcasting this entire session to every screen in the Republic. The chips. Proof of Order 66, floating in the Senate chamber while Darth Sidious fights 4 Jedi on the floor below, clearly revealed as exactly what he is. The Senate session was always meant to expose Palpatine, but exposure in testimony, in financial records, in Dooku's recorded words, could potentially be argued, discredited, challenged, reframed. This cannot be argued. The Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, Sith lightning firing from his hands, fighting Jedi Masters in the Senate chamber, while the physical evidence of his conspiracy hangs above his head for every camera in the building to capture. The galaxy is watching, and what the galaxy is watching is the truth. Palpatine understands this too. The calculation in his eyes shifts from tactical problem solving to something simpler and more absolute. He has one remaining path and he commits to it completely, pouring everything into his combat, abandoning subtlety for the pure overwhelming power of a Sith Lord at full capacity. The force lightning that erupts from both his hands simultaneously is not the measured bursts of the previous combat. It's the full expression of Darth Sidious's power, a storm of dark side energy that fills the central space of the chamber, arcing between the metal surfaces of surrounding pods, creating a cage of electricity that forces Luke and Mace to defend simultaneously, while Obi-Wan and Kit Fisto are driven back by the sheer force of the discharge. Mace catches most of it with Vapod, his purple blade conducting and redirecting, but the volume is beyond what the technique circuit can fully manage. Luke feels it reaching him through the gaps in the coverage and extends both hands, channeling the Force into the specific technique he developed across decades of teaching it to students, who needed to understand that the light side is not passive. Electric judgment, not a dark side technique and not a light side technique in the simple categorical sense. The Force itself channeled as electrical energy through the intention of someone who has chosen light so completely that even borrowed power expresses that choice. Where Palpatine's lightning is cold and blue-white, the energy that flows from Luke's hands is warm and green, emerald light that carries the specific quality of something that has been through darkness and chosen differently. The two energies meet in the center of the chamber space. The impact produces a concussive force wave that travels outward from the contact point, rocking every remaining pod, shattering the upper gallery railing, extinguishing half the chamber's lighting. In the dimness that follows, Luke and Palpatine face each other across the central platform, and the combat has reached the point it was always going to reach, just the two of them. Mace is recovering from the lightning overload, his Vapod having channeled more than its designer intended in a single burst. Obi-Wan and Kit Fisto are on their feet, but outside the immediate engagement radius. Ahsoka's white blades are visible at the far edge of the platform, her defensive perimeter still protecting the civilian positions, her force presence burning bright and ready. Palpatine looks at Luke across the platform. His robes are damaged, his composure is damaged, but his eyes are still the eyes of someone who has survived 1,000 years of opposition through intelligence and ruthlessness. You absorbed the lightning, he says. Yes, that technique requires light side intent, he says. You're in the Chosen One's body channeling light side force energy. That should be impossible. The midi-chlorian density alone, without dark side fuel, is exactly sufficient, Luke says. The Chosen One's power doesn't require darkness. It never did. Darkness was what you added. The power itself is neutral. It responds to intention. And my intention has been clear for a very long time. Palpatine attacks. Final commitment, nothing held back. Juyo at full expression with force augmentation that makes him move like physics is optional. The assault is extraordinary in its technical completeness. Every angle covered, every possible response anticipated, decades of experience in combat against the greatest warriors in the galaxy, expressed as a single continuous attack sequence. Luke doesn't meet it with equal aggression. He meets it with Form 3, Soresu. Obi-Wan's form. The impenetrable defense, wall of light, every blade angle closing every possible attack line, moving the minimum necessary distance, conserving energy, letting the attacker exhaust themselves against a surface that gives nothing. He learned it from Obi-Wan's ghost in the Dagobah cave, from the records Obi-Wan left behind, from decades of teaching it to students who needed to understand that defense is not weakness. He defends. And Palpatine's assault continues for a full minute of sustained combat at the highest level either of them can generate. And at the end of that minute, Sidious is breathing harder than when he started, and Luke's guard has not broken once. Then Luke moves. The transition from Soresu to Gemso is Anakin's body's most natural motion, the switch from perfect defense to overwhelming offense, the moment when all the conserved energy of Soresu releases simultaneously into Gemso power strikes. Luke makes the transition with a precision that Anakin Skywalker never achieved, because Anakin was too emotional to maintain the Soresu phase long enough to drain his opponent before the switch. Luke is not too emotional. He is the most disciplined practitioner of this exact transition the Jedi tradition has ever produced. The Gemso combination that follows is not angry, it is not fueled by hate or fear or the desperate energy of someone fighting for their life. It is executed with the calm certainty of a craftsman performing a task at which they have achieved mastery. Strike, force push, high cut, environmental attack, pulling the platform edge toward Palpatine's feet, low sweep, and then the thing that Palpatine's defenses cannot handle because it requires seeing the attack before it arrives. Luke uses Shatterpoint. He reads the critical fault line in Palpatine's guard, the specific angle where the defensive coverage is thinnest, the legacy of a dueling style developed long ago when the Rule of Two's artificial selection of opponents created systematic blind spots in Sidious's technique. The fault line that exists because when you only ever fight opponents weaker than yourself, you never learn that you have gaps. One strike, precisely angled, the force concentrated into the lightsaber blade at the exact angle that exploits the fault line. Both of Palpatine's lightsabers fly free simultaneously. The Sith Lord is disarmed. Two crimson blades spinning away across the chamber floor, their glow reflecting off the damaged surfaces around them. Palpatine stands with empty hands and Luke's blue blade at his throat, and the cameras of the Galactic Republic broadcast system recording every angle of it. The chamber is silent. The Sith have a tradition, Palpatine says. His voice is steady, control like bedrock maintained through everything. Strike down your enemy. Take what you've won. That's the lesson I spent decades trying to teach the Chosen One. I know, Luke says. I learned different lessons. From whom? The Jedi who told you attachments were sin? The Masters who... From my father, Luke says quietly, who chose at the very end of his life to save his son instead of serve his master. The lesson he left me wasn't about power. It was about what power is actually for. He holds Palpatine's gaze. You don't deserve death. You deserve to stand in that chamber and answer for what you did. To the senators whose democracy you corrupted. To the clone soldiers whose autonomy you stole. To the Jedi Order you tried to destroy. Justice is not execution. Justice is accountability. Palpatine searches his face for weakness in this position and finds none. You're a greater fool than your father would have been. Maybe, Luke says, but my father's alive in the Force and at peace, and you're under arrest. Mace Windu arrives beside him, his purple blade ignited. His expression is the expression of a man who has used his Shatterpoint ability one final time on this situation and seen what the fault lines say about its outcome. He looks at Luke with something that has moved through the entire range of uncertainty and arrived at a specific settled recognition. "It's done," Mace says. "It's done," Luke agrees. Yoda drops from the upper gallery where he has been present and ready throughout the duel, covering the one escape route they agreed needed the most powerful possible guard. He lands without sound and stands before Darth Sidious with 900 years of accumulated Jedi wisdom, looking at the culmination of 1,000 years of Sith calculation. "Darth Sidious," Yoda says, "arrested you are for crimes against the Republic, against the Jedi, against the living force itself. A pause. Answer for them you will in this life." The Force suppression cuffs appear in Kit Fisto's hands. Palpatine looks at them. His eyes move from the cuffs to Yoda to Mace to Luke and perform a final comprehensive calculation of available options. Then he holds out his wrists. From the gallery, from the remaining delegation pods, from the Senate guards and the chip-free 500 First clones, and the senators who have been watching this from behind overturned furniture and evacuation barriers, a sound builds, not the disciplined applause of a formal session. Something rawer, the specific human sound of beings who have been holding their breath through something enormous and are finally releasing it. Rex in the gallery removes his helmet. His face is the face of a man who watched Agen Kohler die and watched Darth Sidious be taken alive and is processing what it means that those two things are equally real. He looks down at Luke on the chamber floor and raises one fist, not a salute, something more personal than that, an acknowledgement between two beings who did something together. Luke raises his own fist in return. Ahsoka appears at his shoulder, her white blades deactivated, her montral catching the emergency lighting at an angle that makes her look for a moment like something Luke knows from much later. "It's over," she says, and the words carry the weight of someone who in another timeline lived the version of this where it wasn't over at all. "It's over," Luke says. "This part of it. Resolution. The future begins." The hours after Palpatine's arrest move with the specific organized chaos of civilizational crisis being managed in real time. The Senate session continues under Bail Organa's guidance because governance doesn't pause for dramatic revelations, and the practical work of dismantling a conspiracy requires the same institutional machinery that the conspiracy used, now redirected. Palpatine is held in the Senate building security complex under force suppression technology that Mace Windu personally supervises, 3 Jedi Masters on rotation guard duty. Complete isolation from communication technology. The question of what criminal trial process applies to a sitting Supreme Chancellor is genuinely novel, and the Senate's legal scholars will spend months arguing about jurisdiction. Luke, consulted on the security arrangements, confirms that Palpatine knows essence transfer, the ability to project his consciousness into another body upon death, and that the Force suppression technology must account for this. Mace asks how he knows about essence transfer. Luke says the Force has been generous with information lately. Mace looks at him with the expression of a man maintaining a reasonable face around an unreasonable situation, and accepts this answer, because at this point in the day, accepting things has become the primary operational mode. Count Dooku is brought from his secure holding facility to the Senate chamber to make his testimony available in person rather than by recording. The procedure is more powerful for his physical presence, a former Sith Lord standing before the body he spent years manipulating, choosing truth as his final meaningful act. Obi-Wan escorts him. They walk in silence, and when Dooku enters the chamber and sees Palpatine's empty platform, something moves across his face that might be called relief if you were willing to extend some generosity to its interpretation. He testifies for 3 hours, the full account, every detail, every communication, every decision, every step of the manufactured war's architecture. The Jedi Council has truth serum and force compulsion verification running throughout, and the Senate's legal committee confirms the verification chain's reliability 3 separate times during the testimony, preempting challenges. By the end, the financial records and Dooku's testimony form an interlocking case so thoroughly documented that the Senate's lawyers tell Bail Organa privately that they've never seen a cleaner evidentiary package. The vote to suspend Palpatine's chancellorship and appoint an emergency governance committee is not close. It passes with the kind of majority that historical votes achieve when the alternatives are clear and the stakes are existential. Bail Organa is appointed chair of the Emergency Governance Committee. His first 3 acts are the dissolution of the emergency powers clauses that Palpatine accumulated across years of manufactured crisis, the formation of an independent investigation into the war's origins with full subpoena authority, and the initiation of a legal framework for clone trooper citizenship and rights. The first formal acknowledgement in Republic law that the beings who fought the war deserved to have their humanity recognized. Rex receives formal notification of his citizenship status while still in the Senate building. He reads it twice, then hands it to Echo, who reads it once and passes it to Jesse, who reads it and then doesn't say anything for a full minute. Luke watches from across the corridor and files the image away in the part of his memory that preserves the things that matter most. Obi-Wan finds him that evening on the temple's outer walkway, the one that runs around the second Spire's base and offers an unobstructed view of the city. They stand together in silence for what might be 5 minutes before either of them speaks. "I have a great many questions," Obi-Wan says. "I know. I'd like to ask them. Eventually, when the timeline allows for a conversation longer than the operational briefings we've been conducting for 3 days." "I'd like that too," Luke says. "You're not Anakin. It's not an accusation. It's the statement of something Obi-Wan has known for 3 days and is finally saying in a context where it doesn't need to be set aside for immediate practical requirements." "No," Luke says. "I'm not, but you're." Obi-Wan pauses, working through the phrasing, something that came from Anakin, something that carries him. "I'm his son," Luke says. "In the most literal possible sense. And something the Force did that I can't explain brought me back here, in his body, to stop what was going to happen to him." He pauses. "To all of you, the city spreads below them, billions of lives going about the business of existing, most of them not yet fully understanding what changed today, all of them living in a galaxy that will never become what it was going to become." In the other timeline, Luke says, "You spent 20 years in exile. On Tatooine, watching the desert, waiting, hoping. You kept yourself alive on the chance that one day there would be something worth fighting for again." Obi-Wan is quiet. "I don't want that for you," Luke says. "You deserve better than 20 years of watching the aftermath of something you couldn't prevent. You deserve to be here, doing what you do, being who you are." "Who am I?" Obi-Wan asks. And it's not really a question. It's a response to the emotional weight of what Luke just said, the specific kind of non-question that carries more feeling than any actual question could. "The best Jedi I've ever known," Luke says. "In any timeline." Obi-Wan looks at the city for a long moment. "I'm going to need time to process all of this." "Take all the time you need," Luke says. "The crisis is over. Time is something we have now." "The boy Anakin was," Obi-Wan says carefully, "the son you're carrying this body for. Where is he? In the Force." "Present," Luke says. "I can feel him sometimes. Not as a separate consciousness, not competing for the same awareness, more like a foundation. The person whose life this was before, still real, still mattering. I don't think the Force erased him to make room for me. I think it brought me into him because the merger was necessary." He pauses. "I'm both of us now. Everything Anakin would have been without the fall, and everything I became in a life that no longer exists. Whatever that makes me, it's what I am. And what are you going to do with it?" "Raise my children," Luke says. "Be present for Padme. Help rebuild the Jedi Order into something better. Teach what I've learned. Try to make this life worthy of the chance that was given to it." Obi-Wan nods. Accepts this. Then, with the specific timing that is entirely Obi-Wan and a voice that manages to contain both genuine emotion and the dry register that is his natural armor, "You could have mentioned Palpatine the moment you arrived." "I needed evidence," Luke says, for perhaps the 4th time in 3 days. "You knew everything, the entire conspiracy. The names, the accounts, the chips. You could have walked directly to this council and been evaluated by the halls of healing for claiming the Chancellor was a Sith Lord while simultaneously displaying Force abilities 3 times beyond my listed Padawan competencies," Luke says. "You'd have put me in a meditation chamber and had Yoda examine me for dark side corruption while Palpatine continued his timeline." A pause. "That is," Obi-Wan says, frustratingly accurate. "I know. I still would have liked a bit more notice." "Noted," Luke says, and for the first time in 3 days, he lets himself fully smile. And the smile is Anakin's face, and Luke's soul, and something new that is both. The Jedi Council session 3 days after Palpatine's arrest is quieter than the emergency session that preceded it. The crisis energy has metabolized into something more sustainable, and the business of the Council has shifted from responding to disaster to building something better. Luke stands in the center of the circle one more time, and this time the atmosphere is not confrontational or skeptical or uncertain. Yoda speaks first. Much you have done, young Skywalker, more than you have explained. More than fully understood, it can be, perhaps ever. He holds Luke's gaze with the ancient directness that 900 years of wisdom makes effortless. Ask you to explain everything, we do not. But know this, the Council does. Whatever you are, whatever came through you or into you or through the Force in ways we do not have words for, chosen you were. For this, for exactly this. And well done, you have done it. Luke receives this with the stillness of someone who has been prepared for a great many things and still finds this, specifically, unexpectedly moving. Mace speaks. The code reforms you proposed. The Council has been discussing them since your initial presentation. We've reached consensus. He pauses, the specific Mace Windu pause of someone who is about to say something that costs them some pride and is choosing to pay the price. You were right about attachment, about what the Prohibition was doing and what it wasn't doing. We've been treating suppression as mastery and calling it tradition. The reforms will begin immediately. The new code, as we're calling it internally, will be formalized over the coming months with input from all council members and senior knights. And one more thing, Plo Koon says, the matter of your status. You arrived in this crisis as a Jedi Knight. Your performance in every dimension, combat and strategy, and the qualities that matter more than either, exceeds any standard of mastership the Council has ever applied. We would like to formally recognize that. Luke is quiet for a moment. The irony of being offered the rank that in the original timeline was denied to his father, and that denial helped push toward the dark side, is not lost on him. The moment has a completeness that feels like the Force confirming something. Thank you, he says. I accept. On one condition. Mace raises an eyebrow. A condition. The Order's relationship with the Senate. It needs to change. We've been operating as political instruments for too long. Jedi serve the Force and serve the people. Not institutions, not chancellors, not emergency committees. That independence needs to be formalized so that what Palpatine did, using Jedi authority as a fig leaf for political power accumulation, can never happen again. The Council exchanges glances. Then Yoda says, agree, we do. Begin this work we shall. Together. Luke bows. Then I accept the rank. Gratefully. The Jedi Order's formal reform process takes months rather than days, which is appropriate for changes to a 10,000-year institution. Luke contributes to it from the inside and from the outside simultaneously, attending council sessions as a master while spending the majority of his time on Naboo with Padme, which is where he needs to be as her pregnancy advances toward its term. The Separatist conflict begins its collapse within weeks of Palpatine's arrest. The financial and command infrastructure that sustained it was Palpatine's, and without his direction, the corporate interests that funded the Confederacy of Independent Systems begin making the individual calculations that self-interested actors make when the protection that made certain behaviors viable is removed. System by system, the diplomatic channels that Padme had been arguing for years were the right approach begin producing results. The war doesn't end in a single decisive battle. It ends in the way that manufactured conflicts end when the manufacturer is removed, gradually, incompletely, requiring sustained diplomatic work that is unglamorous and essential, and exactly the kind of task that Padme Amidala was made for. She works from Naboo rather than Coruscant as her pregnancy progresses, conducting Senate business via hologram, advising Bail Organa's emergency committee on the political architecture of the Reconstruction, writing the legislation that will formally establish clone trooper citizenship rights with the thoroughness of someone who intends this to stand up to every legal challenge it will face across the next 100 years. Rex visits Naboo twice during this period. The first visit is official, coordinating with the Emergency Governance Committee on the transition of the clone army from a Kaminoan-controlled military force to a volunteer defense service, with full citizenship provisions. The second visit is personal. He brings Jesse and Echo and 3 other chip-free 500 First members who have specifically requested to meet the Jedi General, who told them they were people. They sit on the veranda overlooking the lake, and Padme serves them tea, and they spend 2 hours talking about what they want to do with their lives now that they have lives to direct. Jesse has been thinking about agriculture. Echo is considering engineering. Rex hasn't decided, which he says with a quality that suggests he finds the having of options genuinely novel. You have time, Luke tells him. Do we? Rex asks. Not anxious, genuinely curious, as if he's still getting used to the idea that time is something he possesses rather than something he operates within. "You do," Luke says. "Take it." Ahsoka visits regularly. She and Luke have developed a relationship that contains several simultaneous things. The formal structure of a former Padawan and a master, the specific ease of two people who have known each other across timelines in ways only one of them consciously remembers, and a genuine friendship that is building itself on its own terms in this present, rather than borrowing from the past Luke carries. She's good with Padme. Direct and warm in equal measure, the specific combination that Padme finds easier to trust than warmth alone. They develop a friendship independent of Luke that he observes with the distinct pleasure of watching two people he loves recognize each other's value. Ahsoka decides not to rejoin the Jedi Order formally, not because she doesn't believe in it. She says plainly that what the Reformed Order is becoming is something she respects, but because she has come to understand that her path is her own, and the formal structure was never quite the right vessel for it. She agrees to serve as an informal liaison between the Order and the wider Force-sensitive community that exists outside its walls. Luke tells her this is exactly right. She tells him to stop looking at her like she reminds him of someone. He tells her he'll work on it. The Mandalore mission eventually happens, 3 months after Coruscant, with the Separatist infrastructure sufficiently collapsed that Maul's network has lost most of its backing. Ahsoka and Bo-Katan and Rex lead a coordinated operation that captures Maul on Mandalore's surface after a confrontation that is shorter and cleaner than it would have been at the height of the Clone Wars. Ahsoka calls Luke afterward. "It went well," she says. "I know," Luke says. "Stop knowing things," she says, and she's smiling when she says it. Obi-Wan visits Naboo 4 times in the months before the twins are born. He and Luke spend long evenings on the veranda talking about the Force in the way that two Jedi Masters who have lived very different versions of very long lives can talk about it, not as a debate, not as instruction, but as two people comparing notes on the same enormous subject from different vantage points. Obi-Wan has questions that take weeks to build up to and then emerge in the middle of a sentence about something entirely different. Luke answers what he can, redirects what he can't, and appreciates every moment of it with the specific depth of appreciation available only to someone who knows exactly what they could have lost. Obi-Wan never fully resolves his uncertainty about what Luke is. He says so directly one evening, which is Obi-Wan's version of accepting it. "I've decided," he says, "that the Force clearly knows what it's doing, and my opinion of the mechanism is not required for the outcome to be valid." "That's a very Jedi way of looking at it," Luke says. "I've been working on my Jedi perspective," Obi-Wan says dryly. "I understand it's being reformed." The twins are born on Naboo in the Lake Country in the villa at Varakino, where the lake shimmers at dawn with the specific quality of light that belongs to this place and no other. The birth is attended by Jedi healers and Republic medical droids, and Padme's mother and her sisters, and in the waiting room that is also somehow the veranda because Padme has gracefully but definitively declined to be managed by hospital protocols, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka and Rex. Luke holds Padme's hand through 17 hours of labor that he assists with every Force technique he knows for pain management and physiological support, and at the end of those 17 hours the healer says, "It's a girl." He holds his sister for the first time with his father's hands, and she is red-faced and outraged and perfect, and he says her name out loud before Padme has asked. "Leia," he says. Padme, exhausted and radiant, looks at him. "You're sure?" "She already is." 40 minutes later, and a boy. Luke looks at himself, his past self, the version of himself that will grow up in this timeline, not on Tatooine, with no knowledge of who he is, but here, on Naboo, with parents who are present and a sister who will grow up alongside him, and a mother who is alive. He looks at the child who will never be the farm boy who stared at the twin sons dreaming of somewhere else, because this version of Luke Skywalker will grow up knowing exactly who he is. "Luke," Padme says, and she's not naming the baby, she's addressing the man holding him, and the name carries everything. The impossible thing that happened, the miracle she's been living in for 7 months, the gratitude and the grief and the love that has no adequate language for what it is. "Yes," he says. Both yes to the name and yes to everything the name means coming from her. "Thank you," she says, "for coming back, for doing this, for being here. There's nowhere else," he says. "There never was." Years later, the Lake Country, Varakino, Naboo. The villa has the comfortable depth of a home that has been lived in by people who love each other for long enough that the love becomes part of the architecture. Books in languages from a dozen systems. Marks on a door frame where 2 children's heights were recorded in annual increments. A garden that grew wild in the good way. shaped by hands that knew what they were doing but weren't interested in controlling it. Leia Skywalker is 18 years old and has been accepted into the Reformed Senate's Junior Representative Program, which Padme says she was already qualified for at 15, but she's glad Leia waited. She has her mother's political intelligence and her father's absolute refusal to be moved once she's decided on a position, and the combination makes her formidable in any room she enters. She is already who she was always going to be, fierce and principled and capable of a compassion that doesn't preclude toughness, the best of both parents expressed as a singular person. Luke is 18 years old and is completing his first year of formal Jedi training, which he began at 10 after it became clear that his Force sensitivity required guidance rather than suppression. He is patient, intuitive, gentle in the way that comes from being raised by parents who understood that gentleness is not weakness. He has a mechanical aptitude that manifests as an endless dismantled collection of speeders and droids in the villa's lower storage area, and he has his father's easy relationship with the Force, and he will be, in time, a Jedi of great quality, not the greatest in history. Because that title belongs to the man whose body he inhabits, but a Jedi who will mean something to the people he serves. One evening in the summer of their 18th year, both twins find their father sitting on the veranda at sunset, looking at the lake with the expression he sometimes has, the one that carries distance, as if he's seeing something beyond the present moment. "Are you all right?" young Luke asks. "Better than all right," the man they call father says, which is true and is also not the whole truth, because the whole truth is too large for any answer. Leia sits beside him on the railing. "Tell us again about the Senate session," she says, "when you exposed the Chancellor." "You've heard it 100 times, young Luke says, taking the chair on the other side. "She knows," their father says. "She just likes it." "I like stories where we win," Leia says, unapologetically. "So do I," he says. He tells the story, the way he always tells it, the elevator on the invisible hand, the duel with Dooku, meeting their mother for the first time in this body, the council chamber, Rex and the chips, Ahsoka and the 332nd, the Opera House confrontation, the Senate session, the final duel. He doesn't embellish and he doesn't simplify and he doesn't hide the cost of it. Agen Kolar, the complexity of Dooku's choice, the things that didn't go perfectly. He tells it as something that was not inevitable, something that required every person who participated in it to choose correctly in their own particular moment, something that could have gone differently at any of a dozen points. "Were you scared?" young Luke asks. The question he always asks. "I was clear," his father says, which is different from not being scared. What's the difference? Fear is information. It tells you what matters. Clarity is what you do with that information. He pauses. "I was afraid of losing your mother, of losing Ahsoka, of failing your grandfather's memory, of failing everyone who needed this to work. That fear was appropriate. It meant I understood the stakes. What I didn't let it do was make the decisions for me." Leia looks at him with the specific expression she gets when she's filing something away for later use. "That's the part of the Jedi teaching I actually believe," she says. "The rest of it I'm still working through." "Take your time," he says. The Force is patient. Padme appears in the doorway, her presence in the Force warm and steady, and the thing that has served as the ground under his feet since the moment he walked into her apartment 3 days after the invisible hand and told her the impossible truth. She looks at the three of them on the veranda in the last light of the day. "Dinner," she says. "All three of you, now." Young Luke is up immediately. Leia follows with senatorial dignity. Their father lingers for a moment, looking at the lake, and in the Force he feels what he always feels when he gives himself a moment to feel it fully. Everything he came here to protect, alive and whole and present. He reaches into the Force and feels his grandfather's presence there, not in the body he wears, not competing for the same consciousness, but present in the deeper way that those who have become one with the Force are present. Anakin Skywalker, who in another timeline fell and was redeemed at the very end by the love of a son he never knew. Here, present in the living Force before the fall ever came, watching through whatever awareness the Force grants those who rest within it. "I hope it's enough," Luke says quietly. "I hope you can see what we made." The Force responds the way it responds, not in words, not in the specific communication of speech, but in the quality of warmth that has no other description. Presence, acknowledgement, something that in the absence of a better word must be called love. He goes inside. The door closes behind him. The veranda is empty. The lake dark. The stars beginning to assert themselves above the water. The Republic endures. The Jedi Order lives and grows into something better than what it was. The clones are citizens and the war is history and the Sith are defeated. Padme is alive, his children are safe, Ahsoka walks her own path under open skies. And somewhere in the living Force, Anakin Skywalker rests in the peace that in another life came so late, having been given the gift that no one deserves and everyone needs, a son who loved him enough to save him before he fell. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.